The woman stepped off the train with terror in her eyes, clutching a worn suitcase like it was the only thing keeping her alive. She'd traveled 2,000 miles to marry a stranger, running from a nightmare that still haunted her sleep. The tall rancher waiting on the platform saw her fear immediately and spoke words that would change everything. Fear has no place in my home. This is the story of how one promise saved a life and how love became the strongest shelter of all. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let me take you back to Wyoming, 1875, where everything began. The train's whistle cut through the spring air like a cry for help, and Eliza Rowan felt every muscle in her body tense at the sound. She sat rigid in the third-class car, her gloved hands twisted together so tightly that her knuckles had gone white beneath the thin fabric. Through the smudged window, the landscape had transformed from the crowded chaos of eastern cities to something vast and terrifying in its emptiness, rolling plains that stretched endlessly under a sky so big it made her feel impossibly small. She'd been traveling for 6 days. 6 days of rattling tracks and sleepless nights. 6 days of wondering if she'd made the worst mistake of her life. 6 days of fighting the urge to get off at every stop and disappear into whatever town presented itself. But she couldn't go back. Going back meant death, or something worse than death. Going back meant Nathaniel. The thought of his name made her stomach clench, and she forced herself to breathe slowly, the way she'd taught herself to do during those terrible nights in Boston when his footsteps in the hallway meant pain was coming. She pressed one hand against the small leather case in her lap. Everything she owned in the world fit inside it. 2 dresses, a nightgown, her mother's silver hairbrush, and the letters. Those careful, kind letters written in strong, steady handwriting that had promised her a different life. Next stop, Hawthorne, Wyoming, the conductor called, making his way through the car. Hawthorne in 10 minutes. Eliza's heart hammered against her ribs. 10 minutes. 10 minutes until she met the man she'd agreed to marry, a man she knew only through words on paper. Caleb Mercer, rancher, widower. A man who'd written to the marriage agency in Philadelphia seeking a wife, someone to share the burden of his land and the quiet of his home. His letters had been different from the others she'd received. No flowery promises, no demands for a photograph, no lists of wifely duties she'd be expected to perform. Just honesty, just kindness. I won't lie to you, he'd written in his 3rd letter. Life out here is hard. The winters are brutal, the work never ends, and loneliness is a constant companion. But I can promise you respect. I can promise you safety. I can promise you a home where you'll be a partner, not property. If that's something you need, then maybe we can help each other. Safety. That single word had made her hands shake when she'd read it. She'd read that letter 17 times before she'd finally written back, before she'd finally said yes, before she'd finally packed her case and walked out of the boarding house in the middle of the night while Nathaniel's investigators were still searching the wrong part of the city. The train began to slow, and Eliza stood on unsteady legs, gripping the seat back for support. Through the window, she could see the town emerging from the plains like something from a dream or a mirage. Hawthorne wasn't much just a collection of wooden buildings clustered around the train depot, but after Boston's brick and stone and suffocating crowds, it looked like another world entirely. "You getting off here, miss?" an elderly woman across the aisle asked kindly. She'd tried to start conversations several times during the journey, but Eliza had kept her responses short, afraid that talking would lead to questions, and questions would lead to lies, and lies might somehow lead Nathaniel straight to her. "Yes?" Eliza managed her voice hoarse from disuse. "Yes, I am. You got people meeting you. It's not safe for a lady alone out here." Eliza nodded, not trusting herself to say more. People. Person. One person. A stranger she'd promised to marry. The train lurched to a complete stop, and the conductor opened the door, letting in a blast of air that smelled nothing like Boston. No coal smoke, no harbor, rot, no press of unwashed humanity. This air smelled like grass and dust, and something wild she couldn't name. It terrified her. She forced herself to move, clutching her case to her chest like a shield. The steps down from the train seemed impossibly steep, and her legs shook as she descended them. The platform was rough wood that creaked under her feet, and she stood there frozen for a moment, overwhelmed by the bigness of everything, the sky, the land, the silence broken only by the hiss of the train's engine. "Miss Rowan." The voice came from her left, and Eliza turned so quickly she nearly stumbled. The man standing there was taller than she'd expected, though she hadn't known what to expect. He wore work clothes, a clean shirt, and sturdy pants and boots caked with dried mud, and he held his hat in his hands as he looked at her. His face was weathered from sun and wind, with lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent outdoors, and his dark hair was slightly too long, brushing his collar. But it was his eyes that caught her, brown and steady, with a gentleness in them that made something in her chest ache. "Yes," she whispered. "I'm Eliza Rowan." Caleb Mercer nodded slowly, and she saw him take her in the way she was holding her case, like it might be torn from her arms, the way she stood, with her weight shifted back as if ready to run the way she couldn't quite meet his eyes. She waited for judgment, for disappointment. She was thin, too thin, and she knew the bruise on her left cheekbone was still visible beneath the powder she'd applied that morning. She wasn't what any man would want. But Caleb didn't look disappointed. He looked concerned. "Welcome to Hawthorne, Miss Rowan," he said quietly. "I'm Caleb Mercer. I'm real glad you made it here safely." She nodded, not trusting her voice. Behind them, the train was already preparing to leave, the conductor calling for final boarding. It would pull away in moments, taking with it her last connection to the world she knew, her last chance to change her mind. Caleb seemed to sense her panic because he didn't move closer, didn't reach for her case or try to guide her away from the platform. He just stood there patient, giving her space. "I know this must be overwhelming," he said, "coming all this way to meet a stranger. I want you to know there's no pressure here, Miss Rowan. I have a wagon just over there." He gestured toward the street where a sturdy wagon and 2 horses waited. "If you'd like, we can go out to the ranch and you can see the place. Meet my housekeeper, Mrs. Whitford. Get a feel for things. And if at any point you decide this isn't what you want, I'll bring you back to town. There's a boarding house run by a good woman named Mrs. Chen. You can stay there as long as you need while you figure out your next step. I'll cover the cost. No questions asked." Eliza stared at him. In her experience, men didn't offer choices. Men took what they wanted and called it their right. Nathaniel had certainly never given her options. You'd let me leave?" she asked, hating how small her voice sounded. Caleb's expression softened. "Miss Rowan, you're not my prisoner. You came here because I made certain promises in my letters, and I mean to keep every one of them. But a marriage only works if both people choose it. You have to choose this. Choose me. And you can't do that if you feel trapped." Behind them, the train whistle blew again, and the engine began to chug wheels, grinding against rails as the train pulled away from the station. Eliza watched it go, watched her last connection to the east disappear into the distance, and felt simultaneously terrified and relieved. She stopped, gathering her courage. "I need to tell you something." Caleb waited, his expression open, patient. I'm not running toward something," she said carefully. "I'm running away from something, from someone." She watched his face for the flash of anger, the calculation, the demand for details that she knew would come. But instead, Caleb just nodded slowly. "I figured as much," he said quietly. "You don't get eyes like yours without seeing something you shouldn't have had to see, something that hurt you." Tears burned at the back of her throat, and she blinked them away fiercely. She couldn't cry. Not here, not now, not in front of this stranger who was being too kind, too understanding. Kindness was dangerous. Kindness made you weak. "Does it matter?" she asked. "What I'm running from?" Caleb considered the question seriously. "Only if it's something that might bring danger to my door," he said. "Only if there's someone who might come looking for you, not because I'd turn you away," he added quickly when he saw her face go pale, "but because I'd need to be prepared, need to know how to protect you." The word protect hit her like a physical blow. When was the last time anyone had wanted to protect her? Her father had died when she was 16, and her mother had followed 2 years later, leaving her alone in Boston with nothing but a modest inheritance and a distant cousin who'd introduced her to Nathaniel Blackwood at a church social. Nathaniel, who'd been handsome and charming and attentive, who'd courted her properly, who'd promised her the world. The wedding had been the end of promises and the beginning of the nightmare. "There might be someone," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. My husband. My legal husband, though I consider the marriage void. He wasn't a good man. He hurt me. Badly. I ran away 6 months ago, and I've been hiding ever since, moving from place to place. He has money, resources. He might still be looking. She expected horror or disgust, or worse, the kind of judgment that blamed the wife for the husband's violence. But Caleb's expression didn't change except for a tightening around his eyes, a hardness that appeared there like steel. "What's his name?" Caleb asked. "Nathaniel Blackwood. He's from Boston. His family has shipping interests and political connections." Caleb was quiet for a long moment, and Eliza felt her heart sink. Of course he wouldn't want to take on that kind of trouble. She should have known better than to tell the truth. "All right," Caleb said finally. "Then we need to be smart about this. Get you settled at the ranch where you're not visible in town every day. Let me talk to Sheriff Avery. Let him know the situation. He's a good man, fought in the war. Doesn't take kindly to men who hurt women. We'll make sure everyone knows to keep an eye out for strangers asking questions." Eliza couldn't speak, couldn't process what she was hearing. You're not sending me away." Caleb looked genuinely confused by the question. "Why would I do that? You came all this way because I offered you safety. Miss Rowan. That offer doesn't come with conditions. It doesn't disappear the second things get complicated. If there's a man out there who hurts you, then we'll make damn sure he can't hurt you again. Wyoming isn't Boston. Out here, we take care of our own." "But I'm not yours," Eliza whispered. "We're not married. We barely know each other." Caleb put his hat back on his head and picked up a worn leather bag that had been sitting at his feet. "You're here under my name, accepting my protection, planning to become my wife. That makes you mine to protect. The ceremony is just paperwork. The commitment is what matters. Now, can I take your case, or would you prefer to carry it?" The question was so practical, so respectful of her choice in even this small thing, that Eliza felt something crack inside her chest. She'd been holding herself together through sheer force of will for 6 months, terrified every moment that Nathaniel would find her, that his hand would close around her arm in a crowded street, that she'd wake up back in that house where screaming did no good because the servants were paid to ignore it. "You can take it," she said, and held out the case with trembling hands. Caleb took it carefully, as if it were made of something precious, and gestured toward the wagon. "Let's get you home, Miss Rowan. You've had a long journey." Home. The word felt foreign and impossible. The walk to the wagon was short, but Eliza felt every eye in the small town on her. She thought Boston was full of gossips, but at least there you could disappear into the crowds. Here she was, news. The mail-order bride. The stranger. The Eastern woman who'd come to marry Caleb Mercer. A few people nodded politely as they passed. A woman sweeping the steps of the general store called out a cheerful, "Welcome to Hawthorne!" An older man tipped his hat. Their friendliness felt suspicious. Eliza had learned not to trust friendly strangers. Caleb helped her up onto the wagon seat, keeping his hands respectful, just a brief touch on her elbow, to steady her, then climbed up beside her. The horses were massive creatures that snorted and stamped their feet, and Eliza pressed herself back against the seat. "They won't hurt you," Caleb said gently. "Molly and Buck are gentle as lambs. I've had them for 5 years. They're more interested in getting home to their hay than anything else." He snapped the reins and the wagon lurched into motion. Eliza gripped the edge of the seat with both hands, her whole body tense. They rode in silence for a while, leaving the town behind. The landscape opened up before them, vast and empty and terrifyingly beautiful. Rolling grasslands stretched in every direction, broken occasionally by clusters of cottonwood trees and the silver ribbon of a creek. The sky seemed impossibly wide, endless blue scattered with clouds that cast moving shadows across the plains. It was so different from Boston's narrow streets and tall buildings that Eliza felt dizzy looking at it. "It's about 5 miles to the ranch," Caleb said after a while. "Clearwater Ranch. Named for the creek that runs through the property. It's good land, 300 acres, enough for a decent-sized cattle herd and some horses. I've got 2 men who work for me, Pete and Samuel. Good men. They know their business and keep to themselves mostly. Live in the bunkhouse on the far side of the property. And then there's Mrs. Whitford. She's my housekeeper. Came with her husband 15 years ago to work on the ranch, but he passed 5 years back. She stayed on. Makes the best apple pie west of the Mississippi, and she doesn't suffer fools." Eliza listened to the sound of his voice, low and steady, with the flat vowels of someone who'd spent his life out west. It was nothing like Nathaniel's clipped Boston accent, nothing like the sharp tone he used when he was angry, which had been most of the time toward the end. "How long have you had the ranch?" she asked, forcing herself to make conversation. "Inherited it from my father 12 years ago when I was 22. He'd built it up from nothing, came out here after the war, claimed the land, and made something of it. I've been working to keep it going ever since. Had a wife for a few years." His voice went quiet. "Sarah. She died in childbirth 4 years ago. The baby too. A little girl." "I'm sorry," Eliza said, and meant it. She understood loss, understood grief. Caleb nodded. "It's been hard. The work doesn't stop just because your heart's broken, though. Ranch needs tending, whether you're ready to tend it or not. But the house got too quiet. Mrs. Whitford tried her best, but it wasn't the same. Started thinking maybe I was doing myself a disservice staying alone out here. Started thinking maybe there was a woman somewhere who needed what I could offer as much as I needed what she could offer." "And what's that?" Eliza asked. "Partnership," Caleb said simply. "Company. Someone to share the burden and the beauty. Sarah and I, we had that. We worked side by side. She wasn't afraid of hard work, wasn't afraid of the land. I'm not looking for someone to replace her. You can't replace people like that. But maybe someone to build something new with, something different but good in its own way." Eliza absorbed this, watching the landscape roll past. A partnership. Not ownership. Not control. Partnership. "I should tell you," she said carefully. "I don't know anything about ranching. I grew up in Boston. My father was a banker. I can read and write and manage household accounts, but I've never worked land. I've never even ridden a horse." "That's all right," Caleb said. "I can teach you what you need to know, and whatever you can't do, we'll figure out together. I'm not expecting you to transform into some kind of frontier woman overnight, Miss Rowan. I just need you to be willing to try." "I can try," Eliza said softly. "I'm good at surviving." Caleb glanced at her, and something in his expression made her chest tighten. "You shouldn't have to just survive," he said. "You should get to live." They rode in silence for a while longer, and gradually Eliza felt some of the tension in her shoulders ease. The rhythmic sound of the horse's hooves, the creak of the wagon, the endless sky above it was all so different from everything she'd known that it felt like she'd traveled to another world entirely. The ranch appeared in the distance, a cluster of buildings nestled in a valley where the creek ran through. The main house was simple but solid, made of logs, chinked with clay, with a covered porch that wrapped around the front. Nearby stood a barn, a bunkhouse, several corrals, and various outbuildings. Smoke rose from the house's chimney, and as they drew closer, Eliza could see chickens pecking in a yard and a dog lying in the sun. "Here we are," Caleb said. "Clearwater Ranch." He pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house, and before he could help her down, the front door burst open and a woman emerged. She was in her 50s, Eliza guessed, with gray streaked hair, pulled back in a severe bun, and a face that had seen its share of hardship. She wore a simple dress and an apron, and she studied Eliza with sharp, assessing eyes. "So you're the bride," Mrs. Whitford said, her voice carrying across the yard. "This is Miss Eliza Rowan?" Caleb said, climbing down from the wagon and extending a hand to help Eliza descend. "Miss Rowan, this is Mrs. Whitford. She runs the house and makes sure I don't starve or work myself to death." "Someone has to, Mrs. Whitford said, but her tone was fond. She approached Eliza, still studying her with that sharp gaze, and Eliza forced herself not to flinch away. She'd learned to read people quickly in the past year, learned to identify danger before it struck. But Mrs. Whitford's assessment didn't feel threatening, it felt protective, like she was determining whether Eliza was good enough for Caleb, not the other way around. "You look half-starved," Mrs. Whitford announced, "and exhausted. When's the last time you ate a proper meal?" I don't remember," Eliza admitted. "Mrs. Whitford made a disapproving sound in the back of her throat. "Well, that stops now. Caleb, show her to the spare room so she can freshen up. I'll have food ready in 15 minutes. And don't you dare tell me you're not hungry, girl. I've got eyes." despite herself. Despite everything, Eliza felt a smile tug at her lips. Yes, ma'am. Good. Maybe you've got some sense after all. Come on then, let's get you settled. The house was simple inside, wood floors, worn smooth from years of use, simple furniture built for utility rather than show windows that let in streams of afternoon sunlight. It smelled like bread baking and wood smoke, and something about it felt safe in a way that made Eliza's throat tighten. Caleb led her down a short hallway to a room at the back of the house. It was small but clean, with a narrow bed covered in a quilt, a simple dresser, a washstand with a pitcher and basin, and a window that looked out toward the creek. This was going to be the nursery, Caleb said quietly, but we never got to use it. I've kept it ready for guests, though we don't get many. It's yours for as long as you need it. The door locks from the inside, he added, and she understood that he was telling her she'd be safe here, that he wouldn't come in uninvited. Thank you, Eliza whispered. Caleb set her case down on the bed and moved toward the door, then paused. Miss Rowan? Eliza, if I may call you that. She nodded. I meant what I said on the platform. Fear has no place in this home. You don't have to be afraid here. Not of me, not of anything. I know you have no reason to trust me yet, but I'm hoping that will change. I'm hoping you'll give us both that chance. He left before she could respond, closing the door gently behind him. Eliza stood alone in the small room, listening to his footsteps retreat down the hallway, and for the first time in months, maybe years, she allowed herself to hope that he might be telling the truth. She unpacked her few belongings, slowly hanging her 2 dresses and the small wardrobe, setting her mother's hairbrush on the dresser, tucking Caleb's letters into the bottom drawer where they'd be safe. Then she poured water from the pitcher into the basin and washed her face and hands, scrubbing away 6 days of train dust and fear. The face that looked back at her from the small mirror above the dresser was one she barely recognized. She'd been pretty once before Nathaniel. Now she saw a woman with shadows under her eyes, cheekbones too sharp from months of not eating properly, and a fading bruise on her left cheek from the last time Nathaniel had found her, before she'd managed to escape for good. She'd been hiding in a boarding house in Philadelphia when his investigator had tracked her down. She'd run out the back while Nathaniel pounded on the front door, had stolen away in the night with nothing but her case and the last of her money. That's when she'd answered the marriage agency's advertisement, when she'd taken the risk of writing to Caleb Mercer in Wyoming, a territory so far from Boston that maybe, just maybe, Nathaniel couldn't follow. A knock on the door made her jump. Miss Rowan, food's ready. Mrs. Whitford's voice was gentle, despite her no-nonsense tone. Eliza opened the door to find the older woman waiting with a kind expression that reminded her painfully of her mother. Come on, dear, you need to eat. You can tell me about yourself while Caleb handles the evening chores. And before you worry, he told me about your situation, about your husband. That man comes around here, he'll find out real quick that Wyoming women don't tolerate men who hurt their wives. I've got a shotgun, and I know how to use it. Despite everything, Eliza laughed, a short, surprised sound she hadn't expected to make. Mrs. Whitford smiled and patted her arm. That's better. Come on now, let's put some food in you. The kitchen was warm and welcoming, with a big stove radiating heat and a table already set with plates and bowls. Mrs. Whitford had prepared a feast beef stew thick with vegetables, fresh bread still warm from the oven butter and honey, and a pitcher of cold milk from the spring house. Eliza sat down at the table and her hands shook as she picked up the spoon. This much food, this much kindness. It felt like a trap, but her stomach was too empty to care. She ate slowly at first, waiting for the criticism, the demand that she eat faster or slower or more neatly. But Mrs. Whitford just sat across from her with her own bowl, eating and occasionally offering more bread or butter, and gradually Eliza relaxed enough to eat properly. Caleb's a good man, Mrs. Whitford said after a while. I know you don't know him yet, and I know you've got no reason to trust what I say. But I've worked for him for 12 years, and I watched him care for his wife with a tenderness most men don't have in them. He mourned her proper, and he's been lonely since. But he's not desperate. He's not looking for just anyone. He's looking for the right someone. Maybe that's you. Maybe it's not. But you'll have time to figure it out without pressure. That's the kind of man he is. Eliza absorbed this, turning it over in her mind. How did his wife die? She asked quietly. Mrs. Whitford's expression grew sad. The baby came early, too early. Sarah was never very strong, and the labor went wrong, The doctor did what he could, but she shook her head. Caleb held that little girl for 2 hours before she passed, held his wife's hand while she slipped away, nearly broke him. But he got up the next morning and tended the animals and kept going because that's what you do out here. You keep going. That's all I've been doing, Eliza heard herself say. Just keeping going. I don't even know what I'm going toward anymore. I just know what I'm running from. Mrs. Whitford reached across the table and covered Eliza's hand with her own. Then maybe it's time you started running towards something instead. Started building something. You've survived this long, girl. That takes strength. Now maybe you can use that strength for something more than survival. Eliza's eyes burned with tears, and she blinked them back furiously. I don't know if I remember how to do anything else. Then we'll teach you, Mrs. Whitford said firmly. That's what family does. Family. The word hung in the air like a promise. That night after Mrs. Whitford had gone home to her small cottage on the property, and the ranch had settled into quiet. Eliza lay in the narrow bed and listened to the unfamiliar sounds of the wilderness. Coyotes called in the distance. The creek murmured over stones. Wind whispered through the grass. And somewhere in the house she heard Caleb moving around, preparing for bed in his own room. She waited for her fear to rise, for the panic that had become her constant companion. Waited for the sound of footsteps approaching her door, for the handle to turn for the invasion that had been her marriage to Nathaniel. But the footsteps never came. The door stayed closed. And eventually, exhausted beyond measure, Eliza Rowan fell into the first truly restful sleep she'd had in 6 months. When she woke in the morning to sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of coffee drifting from the kitchen, she found a note slipped under her door. The handwriting was the same as the letters that had brought her here. Good morning, Eliza. No rush. Sleep as long as you need. When you're ready, there's breakfast in the kitchen and a day ahead with no expectations. Take your time finding your footing. You're safe here. I promise. Caleb. Eliza held the note in trembling hands and read it 3 times. Then she got dressed, braided her hair, and walked out of the room to start the first day of what just might become her new life. The first week at Clearwater Ranch passed in a haze of newness that left Eliza both exhausted and strangely alive. Each morning she woke to sunlight and silence, and each morning she had to remind herself where she was, that the man in the house wouldn't hurt her, that the door she'd locked was a choice rather than a necessity, that the fear coiled in her stomach was a habit she was allowed to break. Caleb kept his distance in those early days, respectful to the point of seeming almost formal. He was up before dawn each morning to tend the animals, and Eliza would hear him moving quietly through the house, the soft thud of his boots on the wooden floors, the gentle closing of the front door as he headed out to begin his work. By the time she emerged from her room, he'd already be gone, and Mrs. Whitford would be in the kitchen preparing breakfast with the efficiency of someone who'd performed these tasks 1,000 times before. Good morning, dear, Mrs. Whitford said on the third morning, glancing up from the stove where she was frying eggs. You're looking better. Got some color back in your cheeks. Eliza touched her face self-consciously. I've been sleeping. Best medicine there is sometimes. Mrs. Whitford slid the eggs onto a plate and added thick slices of bacon and toast. Sit down and eat. Caleb said he'll be back around mid-morning if you wanted to talk to him about anything. Otherwise, he figured you might want to spend the day settling in more. Maybe take a walk around the property when it's not so hot. Get a feel for the place. Eliza sat at the table and picked up her fork, still marveling at the simple act of eating without criticism. Nathaniel had monitored every bite she took, commenting on her figure, her appetite, whether she was eating too much or too little, turning meals into performances of submission. Here, Mrs. Whitford simply put food in front of her and expected her to eat it. No judgment, no commentary beyond making sure she had enough. Mrs. Whitford, Eliza said carefully, may I ask you something? Of course, dear. Why is he being so patient with me, Caleb? I mean, he brought me here to be his wife, but he hasn't asked anything of me, hasn't even suggested when we might marry. Most men would have expectations. Mrs. Whitford sat down across from her with her own cup of coffee, her expression thoughtful. Caleb's not most men. He learned from his father that you can't build anything worth having on force or fear. His pa used to say that the land would teach you respect if you didn't already have it, that you could beat a horse into obedience, but you'd never have its trust. and trust was worth more than obedience any day. Caleb applies that philosophy to everything. He's not interested in obedience from you, Eliza. He's interested in partnership. And partnership requires trust, which requires time. I don't know if I remember how to trust, Eliza admitted quietly. Then you'll learn again, just like you're learning everything else out here, one day at a time. Mrs. Whitford smiled. Besides, Caleb knows you're running from something terrible. Man would have to be blind not to see the fear in your eyes when you first got here. He's giving you space to breathe, space to heal. When you're ready, if you're ready, you'll let him know. The words settled over Eliza like a blanket, warm and unexpected. She ate her breakfast slowly, tasting it properly for the first time in years, and when she was finished, she helped Mrs. Whitford wash the dishes despite the older woman's protests. I need to be useful, Eliza said. I need to do something. All right then, you can help me in the garden this afternoon if you'd like. Got vegetables that need harvesting and weeds that need pulling. Nothing fancy, but it needs doing. So Eliza spent her afternoon in the sun, her hands in the dirt, pulling weeds from between rows of beans and tomatoes and squash, while Mrs. Whitford worked beside her offering commentary on the weather and the neighbors and the general state of Wyoming territory. It was mundane, ordinary work, and Eliza found it strangely soothing, the repetitive motion, the visible progress, the simple satisfaction of a job completed. She was wiping dirt from her hands on her apron when she heard the sound of hooves approaching. Looking up, she saw Caleb riding in on a large bay horse, his hat pulled low against the afternoon sun. He dismounted near the barn and led the horse inside, and Eliza felt her pulse quicken despite herself. Not from fear, she realized with surprise, but from something else. Anticipation, maybe. Curiosity. He emerged from the barn a few minutes later and walked toward the garden, his stride easy and unhurried. When he reached the fence, he leaned against it and smiled at them both. Looks like you've been productive, he said, surveying the neat rows of vegetables and the pile of discarded weeds. Gardens never looked better. Your bride has a talent for hard work, Mrs. Whitford announced, brushing dirt from her own apron. And she doesn't complain. That's a rare quality. Eliza felt heat rise in her cheeks. I'm just doing what needs doing. That's exactly the right attitude. Caleb's smile widened slightly. Miss Rowan, Eliza, I was wondering if you might want to take a walk with me before supper. There's something I'd like to show you, only if you're comfortable with it, he added quickly. No pressure. Eliza glanced at Mrs. Whitford, who gave her an encouraging nod, then looked back at Caleb. He stood relaxed against the fence, patient, waiting for her answer without demanding it. She thought about saying no, about retreating to her room where things felt safer. But something in her pushed back against that impulse, a tiny, stubborn part of her that refused to let Nathaniel take everything from her, including the ability to take a simple walk. All right, she said. I'd like that. Caleb's face brightened, and Eliza realized he'd genuinely been uncertain whether she'd agree. The realization made something shift in her chest. This man, who owned 300 acres and commanded respect in his community, was nervous about asking her to walk with him. She removed her apron and followed him away from the house, her heart beating faster with each step. They walked in silence, at first heading toward the creek that ran through the property. The afternoon was warm but not oppressive, and a breeze carried the scent of grass and wildflowers. In the distance, she could see cattle grazing in clusters, and further out, 2 men on horseback were working among the herd. That's Pete and Samuel, Caleb said, following her gaze. They're good men. Pete's been with me for 8 years, came out from Missouri looking for work and never left. Samuel's younger, only been here 2 years, but he learns fast. They both know about your situation, know to keep an eye out for strangers. You don't have to worry about them. You told them? Eliza asked, unsure how she felt about that. Only the basics. That you're here under my protection, that you're running from a dangerous situation back east, and that they're to alert me immediately if anyone comes around asking questions. They don't need to know more than that, and they won't ask. Privacy matters out here. They reached the creek where cottonwood trees provided shade and the water burbled over smooth stones. Caleb gestured to a flat rock near the bank, and Eliza sat carefully smoothing her skirt. He sat nearby, but not too close, leaving space between them. This is my favorite spot on the whole ranch, Caleb said, looking out over the water. When things get heavy, when the work feels like too much, I come here. Something about the sound of the water that helps clear my head. Sarah used to come here too. said it was the most peaceful place she'd ever known. It's beautiful, Eliza said honestly. I've never seen anything like it. In Boston, there's the harbor, but it's different, industrial. This is wild, Caleb finished. That's what Sarah always said, that the East had tamed its wilderness, but out here the wilderness was still winning. She loved that about it, even when it scared her. Was she from the East too? Philadelphia. Came out here with her family when she was 16. Her father was a minister, got called to start a church in Hawthorne. Sarah and I met at a barn raising when I was 20. She had this laugh that carried across the whole property, loud and unashamed. I knew within 5 minutes I was going to marry her. Eliza heard the love in his voice, the grief that still lingered 4 years after losing her. I'm not trying to be her, she said quietly. I can't be her. Caleb looked at her with surprise. I would never ask that of you. Sarah was Sarah. You're you. They're not comparable things, Eliza. I love my wife. I'll always love her. But she's gone and I'm still here, and life has to keep moving forward. That doesn't mean replacing her. It means building something new, something different. If you and I do this, if we decide to marry, it won't be because I'm looking for Sarah's ghost. It'll be because I see you, Eliza Rowan, and I think we might build something good together. The words hit her harder than she'd expected. When was the last time someone had truly seen her not as property or possession, not as a problem to be solved or a prize to be won, but just as herself? I don't know if there's anything good left in me to build with, she admitted, surprised by her own honesty. I feel broken, used up, like Nathaniel took everything that mattered and left behind just damage. You're not broken, Caleb said firmly. You're hurt. There's a difference. Broken things can't heal. Hurt things can give in time and care and the right conditions. You survived something terrible, Eliza. That takes strength, not weakness. And whatever Nathaniel took from you, it wasn't everything. You're here. You're fighting. That's not nothing. Eliza felt tears prick at her eyes, and she blinked them back angrily. She'd cried enough over Nathaniel. She wouldn't give him any more of her tears. Tell me about the ranch, she said, changing the subject. Tell me what your days are like. What you need from a wife. If I'm going to consider this, I need to understand what I'd be agreeing to. Caleb accepted the shift in conversation, easily settling back against the rock. All right, honest answer. Please. Ranch work is hard and it never stops. The cattle need tending year-round. In the spring, we do the branding and check for disease. Summer's about maintaining the herd and making sure they have enough grazing. Fall is when we sell off some of the cattle and prepare for winter. Winter's the hardest, making sure the animals stay fed and healthy through the cold and the snow. It's physically demanding work, and most of it falls on me, Pete, and Samuel. He paused, watching the creek. As for what I'd need from a wife, I need a partner, Eliza. Someone who can manage the house side of things while I'm managing the land. Mrs. Whitford does most of that now, but she's getting older, and it's too much for one person. I need someone who can handle the cooking, the preserving the garden, the chickens. Someone who can keep the books and manage supplies. Someone I can talk to at the end of a long day. Someone who understands that this life is hard but beautiful, and who's willing to work beside me to make it succeed. And in return, Eliza asked, in return you get a home that's yours, a share in everything we build, the respect and partnership I promised in my letters, my protection and my loyalty. I don't expect perfection, Eliza. I don't expect you to know everything from day one. I just expect honesty and effort. If you're willing to try, I'm willing to teach. Eliza absorbed this, turning it over in her mind. And the other parts of marriage, she asked carefully, her cheeks heating. The intimate parts. Caleb's expression grew serious. That's completely your choice. If and when you're ready, if you ever want that part of our marriage to exist, you tell me. I won't push. I won't demand. I won't consider it my right just because we share a name. Any man who thinks marriage gives him ownership over his wife's body is a fool and a brute. Sarah and I, we had that part of our marriage, and it was good because it was mutual, because we both wanted it. I want the same with you, but only if you want it too. If you don't, if you never do, then we'll figure out a different kind of partnership. There's more than one way to build a life together. The relief that flooded through Eliza was so intense it left her lightheaded. Nathaniel had considered her body his property, had taken what he wanted when he wanted it, had left her feeling violated and ashamed. The idea that Caleb would wait, would let her choose, would respect her boundaries, it seemed almost too good to be true. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you accept that most men wouldn't?" "Because I'm not most men," Caleb said simply. "And because a marriage built on force isn't worth having. I want you to want to be here, Eliza. I want you to want me if that time comes. Anything else is just wrong." They sat in silence for a long moment, the creek bubbling between them, and Eliza felt something loosen in her chest, a knot of fear she'd been carrying so long she'd forgotten it was there. "Can I ask you something?" Caleb said eventually. "Yes." "What made you answer my advertisement? Out of all the men looking for wives, why me?" Eliza considered the question seriously. "Your letters," she said finally. "They were different. The other men who wrote, they talked about themselves, about what they had, what they wanted, what they expected. You talked about partnership, about respect. You admitted the life would be hard. You didn't make promises you couldn't keep, and you said," she paused remembering, "you said safety. That word, it mattered more than anything else you could have offered." "Then I'll make sure I keep that promise," Caleb said. "Every day for as long as you're here, you're safe, Eliza. I swear it." They walked back to the house as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange. Mrs. Whitford had supper waiting, roasted chicken and potatoes and fresh bread, and they ate together at the kitchen table, the three of them, conversation flowing easily around stories of neighbors and ranch business and the weather. It felt almost normal, almost like family, and Eliza found herself relaxing in increments, her shoulders loosening, her guard lowering degree by degree. That night before bed, Caleb knocked softly on her door. "Come in," she called, and he opened it just enough to look inside without entering, respecting the boundary of her space. "I wanted to say goodnight," he said, "and to give you this." He held out a small object, and when Eliza took it, she realized it was a key. "For the front door, so you can come and go as you please, so you know you're not trapped here. This is your home now, Eliza. You should have a key." Eliza stared at this key in her palm, the metal warm from his hand. Such a small thing, such an enormous gesture. Nathaniel had kept her locked in, had controlled her every movement. Caleb was giving her freedom. "Thank you," she whispered. "Good night, Eliza. Sleep well." He closed the door gently, and Eliza stood holding the key for a long time before she tucked it carefully into the top drawer of her dresser next to her mother's hairbrush and Caleb's letters. Small treasures. Evidence that maybe, just maybe, her life could be different here. The days began to develop a rhythm. Eliza woke early and helped Mrs. Whitford with breakfast, then spent her mornings working in the garden, or learning to preserve vegetables for winter, or managing the chickens that clucked and scratched in their coop. In the afternoons, when the heat grew oppressive, she'd retreat to the house to help with mending or bookkeeping or any of the dozens of tasks that kept a ranch running. And in the evenings, after supper, Caleb would sometimes ask if she wanted to walk, and she'd find herself saying yes more often than no. He taught her about the land during those walks, pointing out the different types of grass that fed the cattle, the signs of a coming storm in the clouds, the places where antelope came to drink. He told her stories about building the ranch with his father, about the first brutal winter when they'd nearly lost everything about Sarah, and the 4 good years they'd had together. And slowly, carefully, Eliza began to tell him her own stories about growing up in Boston, about her parents' deaths, about the loneliness that had made Nathaniel's attention feel like salvation instead of the trap it actually was. She didn't tell him everything, couldn't bring herself to describe the worst of it, the nights when Nathaniel's anger had turned physical, the day she'd looked in the mirror and realized she was disappearing, becoming a ghost in her own life. But Caleb seemed to sense what she couldn't say, and he never pushed, never demanded more than she could give. 2 weeks after her arrival, Caleb asked if she wanted to learn to ride. "It would give you more freedom," he explained as they stood near the corral where several horses grazed peacefully. "If you can ride, you can explore the property on your own. Go into town when you need to. You wouldn't be dependent on me or the wagon." Eliza looked at the horses nervously. They were beautiful creatures, sleek and powerful, but also enormous. The thought of climbing onto one filled her with anxiety. What if I fall? She asked. Then I'll catch you, Caleb said simply. And if I don't, you'll get back up and try again. Falling is part of learning. But I promise you, Eliza, I'll choose the gentlest horse we have. You'll be safe. He let out a mare named Daisy, a dappled gray creature with soft eyes and a patient temperament. Caleb showed Eliza how to approach her, how to let the horse smell her hand, how to stroke her neck and speak softly to her. The mare stood perfectly still, and gradually Eliza's fear began to ease. Ready to try mounting? Caleb asked. Eliza nodded, her heart pounding. Caleb explained how to put her foot in the stirrup, how to grip the saddle, how to pull herself up. His hands hovered near her waist, ready to steady her, but not touching unless necessary. And when she finally managed to swing herself onto the horse's back, she felt a surge of triumph. I did it, she breathed. You did, Caleb agreed, grinning up at her. How does it feel? Terrifying, but good, powerful. That's exactly right. Now let me teach you how to guide her. They spent an hour in the corral, Caleb walking beside her as she learned to make Daisy walk and turn and stop. By the end of the lesson, Eliza's legs ached, and her hands were cramped from gripping the reins too tightly. But she was smiling, genuinely. Smiling in a way she hadn't in years. You're a natural, Caleb said as he helped her dismount. Few more lessons, and you'll be ready to ride out on your own. I'd like that, Eliza admitted. I'd like to see more of the ranch. More of Wyoming. Then that's what we'll do. I'll teach you everything I know. That night at supper, Mrs. Whitford announced she had news. Martha Henderson came by this afternoon while you two were out riding. She said, serving stew into bowls. Wanted to invite us all to a barn dance on Saturday. The whole county will be there. It's held at the Dawson property every month during summer. Food and music and dancing. Good chance for Eliza to meet the neighbors properly. Eliza felt panic flutter in her chest. A crowd. Strangers. Questions. What if someone had seen her before recognized her? Sent word to Nathaniel. We don't have to go if you're not comfortable, Caleb said immediately, reading her expression. No pressure. But Mrs. Whitford was watching her with knowing eyes. Might do you good, dear. Hiding away out here it's safe, but it's not living. These are good people. They'll welcome you. And you can't avoid them forever. This is a small community. Better to meet them on your own terms with Caleb beside you than to keep putting it off until the worry grows bigger than the reality. Eliza knew she was right, knew that she couldn't hide forever, that building a life here meant becoming part of the community. But the thought of all those eyes on her, all those questions, made her want to retreat to her room and lock the door. What if someone asks about my past? She asked quietly. Then you tell them as much or as little as you want, Caleb said. You came from Boston, you answered my advertisement, and you're considering marrying me. That's all anyone needs to know. Your past is your business, Eliza. No one has a right to demand more. And if they push, then I'll handle it, Caleb said firmly. You're under my protection. That means something here. People will respect it. Eliza took a deep breath, gathering her courage. Mrs. Whitford was right. She couldn't hide forever. And maybe facing her fear of being seen, of being known, was part of healing. All right, she said, we'll go. Saturday arrived with clear skies and warm temperatures. Mrs. Whitford helped Eliza prepare, lending her a blue dress that had belonged to Sarah. She'd want you to have it, dear, and it'll fit you better than those thin things you brought from Boston. The dress was simple but well made, with a full skirt and fitted bodice, and when Eliza looked at herself in the small mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked almost pretty, almost healthy, almost like someone who belonged here. They rode to the Dawson property in the wagon, Caleb driving while Eliza sat beside him, and Mrs. Whitford rode in the back with the covered dishes they were contributing to the communal meal. As they drew closer, Eliza could hear music drifting across the plains, fiddles and guitars, and the stomp of dancing feet. The Dawson barn was enormous, its doors thrown open to reveal a space cleared for dancing. Lanterns hung from the rafters, casting warm light over the crowd already gathered. Tables lined one wall, covered in dishes brought by various families, and musicians occupied a small platform at one end. People clustered in groups, talking and laughing, and children ran between them playing games Eliza didn't recognize. Caleb helped her down from the wagon, his hand steady on her elbow, and she forced herself to breathe slowly. She could do this. She could face these people. She was stronger than her fear. "Ready?" Caleb asked softly. "No, but let's go anyway." They walked into the barn together, and almost immediately people began approaching. First was Sheriff Avery, a tall man with gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Caleb had spoken to him the day after Eliza arrived, sharing the basics of her situation, and now the sheriff nodded at her with respect. "Miss Rowan, welcome to Hawthorne. If you ever need anything, my door is always open." "Thank you, Sheriff." Next came the Hendersons' Martha, who'd brought the invitation, and her husband James, who owned the general store. Then the Dawsons, on whose property they were gathered. Then families whose names blurred together: the Changs, the Johnsons, the O'Briens, the Ramirez family. All of them friendly, all of them curious but not pushy, all of them welcoming her as if she already belonged. A woman about Eliza's age approached with a warm smile. "I'm Sarah Chen, well, Sarah Henderson Chen now. I married Martha's son. I heard you're from Boston. I'm from San Francisco originally. It's nice to have another city girl around who understands that cows are terrifying." Despite herself, Eliza laughed. "They really are. Come sit with me and I'll introduce you to the other wives. We'll protect you from the nosy questions." Sarah led her to a group of women clustered near the food tables, and they folded her into their conversation easily, talking about preserving techniques and the upcoming harvest and the new school teacher who'd arrived last month. No one asked about Boston beyond casual curiosity. No one demanded to know why she'd come west. They simply accepted her presence, and gradually Eliza felt her shoulders unknot. When the dancing started, Caleb appeared at her elbow. "Would you dance with me?" he asked. "Fair warning, I'm not very good." Eliza hesitated. She hadn't danced since before her marriage to Nathaniel. Hadn't let anyone hold her, hadn't let anyone that close. But Caleb's expression was hopeful and slightly nervous, and she found herself nodding. He led her onto the floor as the musician struck up a waltz and carefully, respectfully placed one hand on her waist and took her hand with the other. They began to move, and Eliza stumbled at first out of practice and terrified of the proximity. But Caleb's touch was gentle, his movements patient, and after a few moments she found the rhythm. "You're doing great," he murmured. "I'm stepping on your feet." "Barely noticing." They turned across the floor, and Eliza became aware of people watching them, not with judgment, but with approval. The rancher and his mail-order bride dancing together, building something new. She saw Mrs. Whitford watching from the sidelines with a satisfied smile, saw Sarah Chen give her an encouraging thumbs up, saw the community accepting her as one of their own, and she realized with a shock that went through her like lightning that she felt safe here. Not just physically safe, but emotionally safe. These people weren't going to hurt her. They were going to protect her. This place, this strange wild territory so far from everything she'd known, had become a sanctuary. "Thank you," she said quietly to Caleb as they danced. "For what? For bringing me here, for giving me a chance, for being patient." Caleb's hand tightened slightly on her waist. "Thank you for taking the risk, for trusting me enough to come." The music swelled around them, and for the first time since stepping off that train, Eliza Rowan let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she could build a life here. A real life. A good life. A life without fear. The dance ended, but Caleb didn't immediately release her hand. Instead, he guided her off the floor to where glasses of lemonade waited on a nearby table, and Eliza realized she was breathing hard not from exertion, but from the intensity of what she just allowed herself to experience. Touch without fear. Closeness without threat. It was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. "You all right?" Caleb asked, handing her a glass. "Yes. I haven't danced in a long time." "You did beautifully." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "Eliza, I know this is all happening fast. You've only been here 3 weeks, but I want you to know that whenever you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'd be honored to make this official. To marry you properly. Not because I'm rushing you, but because I want you to know the offer stands. You're not just a guest here. You're not temporary. If you want this to be your home, it can be." Eliza's throat tightened. 3 weeks ago, the thought of binding herself to another man would have sent her into panic. But standing here watching Caleb's honest face in the lantern light, she realized something had shifted inside her. The fear was still there, it might always be there, but it no longer controlled her, and beneath it something new was growing. Hope. trust, maybe even the beginning of something deeper. "I'm not ready yet," she said honestly, "but I think I'm getting there." Caleb's smile was worth every moment of courage it had taken to say those words. "Then we'll take our time, however long you need." The evening wore on, and Eliza found herself relaxing into it, laughing at stories told by the other women sampling food from a dozen different cultures represented in this frontier community, watching children play games that seemed to involve far more running and shouting than any actual rules. Sarah Chen stuck close, introducing her to people and deflecting the few questions that ventured too close to uncomfortable territory. "How are you finding ranch life?" An older woman named Mrs. O'Brien asked, her Irish accent still strong despite decades in America. "Different from Boston," Eliza admitted, "but good, challenging." "And Caleb?" "He's treating you well." "Very well. He's been nothing but kind." Mrs. O'Brien nodded approvingly. "He's a good man. Lost too much too young, but it didn't make him bitter. Some men, tragedy turns them mean. Caleb, it just made him quieter, more careful. He'll take good care of you if you let him." The words stayed with Eliza as she watched Caleb across the barn talking with Sheriff Avery and a group of other ranchers. He stood with easy confidence, respected by these men, and when he caught her looking, he smiled a small private smile meant only for her. But then she noticed something that made her blood run cold. A man she didn't recognize had entered the barn dressed too well for a ranch hand, his clothes bearing the cut and quality of Eastern tailoring. He was speaking with someone near the door, gesturing as he asked questions, and even from a distance, Eliza could see he was searching for someone. Her breathing quickened. It couldn't be. Nathaniel wouldn't have found her this quickly, wouldn't have tracked her all the way to Wyoming. But the man's bearing, his clothes, the way he surveyed the crowd with entitled authority, it all screamed danger. Sarah Chen noticed her distress immediately. "Eliza, what's wrong?" "That man, by the door. Who is he?" Sarah followed her gaze and frowned. "I don't know. Never seen him before." "Want me to get Caleb?" Before Eliza could answer, the stranger's gaze swept across the barn and landed directly on her. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second, and Eliza saw recognition flare in his face. Her worst nightmare crystallized into reality. He knew who she was. "Get Caleb," Eliza whispered urgently. "Now!" Sarah moved quickly, weaving through the crowd toward where Caleb stood. But the stranger was already moving too. Pushing through the dancers with single-minded purpose, his eyes locked on Eliza. She stood frozen, her mind screaming at her to run, while her body refused to cooperate, paralyzed by the fear she'd thought she'd left behind. The man was 10 feet away when Caleb materialized between them, his posture deceptively casual, but his body positioned squarely as a barrier. Sheriff Avery appeared at his side a moment later, hand resting meaningfully on the gun at his hip. "Can I help you with something, friend?" Caleb asked, his voice mild but carrying an edge of steel. The stranger stopped, clearly reassessing the situation. Up close, Eliza could see he was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30, with sharp features and calculating eyes. Not Nathaniel, thank God, but someone who worked for him. One of the investigators he'd hired to track her down. "I'm looking for a woman," the man said smoothly. "Mrs. Nathaniel Blackwood. I have reason to believe she might be in this area." "What's your business with this woman?" Sheriff Avery asked before Caleb could respond. "I'm a private investigator hired by her husband to locate her. She left Boston 6 months ago under unfortunate circumstances. Mr. Blackwood is concerned for her welfare and wishes to bring her home safely." The lies fell from his mouth so easily that Eliza felt sick, concerned for her welfare, as if Nathaniel had ever cared about anything beyond his own control. "I see," the sheriff said slowly. "And you think this woman is here?" "I have information suggesting she may have come to Wyoming. I've been checking various towns, and when I heard about a new bride at the Mercer Ranch..." He turned his attention to Eliza, who was still standing frozen behind Caleb. "Mrs. Blackwood, your husband misses you terribly. He's worried sick. Whatever disagreement you two had, I'm sure it can be resolved if you just come home." Caleb didn't move, didn't let the man get any closer. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," he said calmly. "This is Miss Eliza Rowan. She's from Boston, yes, but she came here of her own free will to answer my advertisement for a bride. She's not the woman you're looking for." "I think she is," the investigator said, pulling a folded photograph from his pocket. "This is Mrs. Blackwood, taken 2 years ago at a society function." He held up the photograph, and Eliza's heart sank. It was her younger and healthier smiling at the camera, in an expensive dress, Nathaniel's arm around her waist, like a shackle disguised as affection. Undeniable proof. But Caleb barely glanced at it. "Interesting, but as I said, this is Miss Rowan, and she's here by choice. If you're looking for someone else, I suggest you keep looking elsewhere." The investigator's expression hardened. "Mr. Mercer, I understand you may have been deceived by this woman, but I assure you she is Mrs. Nathaniel Blackwood, and she is legally bound to return to her husband. If you're harboring her against his wishes—" "Let me stop you right there," Sheriff Avery interrupted, his voice carrying authority. "I don't know how things work where you're from, but in Wyoming territory, we don't take kindly to men who track down women against their will. If this lady," he gestured to Eliza, "says she doesn't want to go with you, then she doesn't go with you, legal husband or not. That's protection of a woman's right to choose her own path, The sheriff cut him off. "Now I'm going to give you 2 options. You can leave Hawthorne tonight peacefully and report back to your employer that you couldn't find his wife. Or you can keep pushing and I'll arrest you for disturbing the peace and harassment. Your choice." The investigator looked between the sheriff, Caleb, and the growing crowd of ranchers who had gathered around them, all wearing expressions that made it clear whose side they were on. Eliza saw him calculating odds, weighing his options, recognizing he was outnumbered and outgunned. "Mr. Blackwood will hear about this," he said finally, directing his words at Eliza. "He'll come himself if necessary. He has legal rights, and he has the resources to enforce them. You can't hide forever." "She's not hiding," Caleb said quietly, and something in his tone made the investigator take a step back. "She's building a new life, and if your employer has a problem with that, he's welcome to come discuss it with me personally, but I guarantee he won't like how that conversation ends." The threat hung in the air, unmistakable. The investigator's jaw tightened, but he knew when he was beaten. With a curt nod, he turned and strode out of the barn, his footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. The moment he was gone, Eliza's legs gave out. Caleb caught her before she hit the ground, his arms strong and steady as he guided her to a nearby chair. The crowd parted to give them space, concerned faces peering down at her, and she realized she was shaking so hard her teeth were chattering. "It's all right," Caleb murmured, kneeling in front of her so they were at eye level. "He's gone. You're safe. Breathe, Eliza. Just breathe." "He'll tell Nathaniel," she gasped out between shaking breaths. "He'll tell him exactly where I am. Nathaniel will come. He won't let this go. He never lets anything go." "Then we'll handle it when he comes," Caleb said firmly. "You're not alone in this, Eliza. You've got me, you've got the sheriff, you've got this entire community. Nathaniel Blackwood might have money and connections in Boston, but out here he's just another man, and he'll find we don't take kindly to bullies." Mrs. Whitford appeared with a cup of water, pressing it into Eliza's trembling hands. "Drink this, dear. Slow sips." Sarah Chen crouched beside Caleb, her face fierce. "We've got your back, Eliza. Every woman here knows what it's like to be underestimated or controlled. We're not letting anyone drag you back to something that hurt you." Martha Henderson nodded from behind her. "Sarah's right. You're one of us now. That means something." Eliza looked around at the faces surrounding her. These people she'd met only hours ago, who knew almost nothing about her yet, were standing with her against a threat they didn't fully understand. The kindness of it, the solidarity, broke something open inside her chest. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you all risk trouble for me?" "Because it's the right thing to do," Sheriff Avery said simply. "And because out here we take care of our own. Now I'm going to make sure that investigator actually leaves town like I told him to. Caleb, get Miss Rowan home safe. I'll come by tomorrow and we'll discuss what steps we need to take if Blackwood does show up." The ride back to the ranch was quiet. Eliza sat pressed against Caleb's side in the wagon, unable to stop shaking despite Mrs. Whitford's shawl wrapped around her shoulders. The joy of the evening had evaporated, replaced by the cold reality that her past had caught up with her. Nathaniel knew where she was. The safety she'd begun to feel was an illusion fragile as glass and just as easily shattered. "I should leave," she said as the ranch house came into view. "I should go tonight before Nathaniel comes. I'm putting you in danger, putting everyone in danger." "You're not going anywhere," Caleb said firmly. "Running didn't work the first time, Eliza. He found you anyway. So this time we stand and fight, together." "You don't understand what he's like. He's ruthless, connected. He could ruin you, destroy everything you've built." "Let him try." Caleb pulled the wagon to a stop and turned to face her. "Eliza, listen to me. I meant what I said in my letters, what I've said since you got here. You're under my protection. That's not just words. That's a promise. And I don't break my promises. Whatever comes, we face it together. Do you understand?" Eliza wanted to argue, wanted to insist she leave to keep him safe, but the determination in his eyes stopped her. He wasn't going to let her run. And if she was honest with herself, she didn't want to run anymore. She was tired of running, tired of being afraid, tired of letting Nathaniel control her life, even from a distance. "I'm scared," she admitted. "I know. But you're also brave. You left him once already. You traveled 2,000 miles alone. You started building a new life. That takes courage, Eliza. More courage than most people ever have to find. So don't let fear make you forget your own strength." Mrs. Whitford climbed down from the wagon and headed toward her cottage, giving them privacy. Caleb helped Eliza down, and they stood together in the moonlight, the ranch quiet around them. "Come inside," he said gently. "Let's get you warm and settled. Tomorrow we'll make plans, figure out our next steps. But tonight, you just need to rest." But Eliza couldn't rest. She lay in her bed for hours, staring at the ceiling, jumping at every sound. Every creak of the house settling made her heart race. Every gust of wind against the windows sounded like footsteps. She kept seeing Nathaniel's face, hearing his voice, feeling his hands, not as they'd been in the beginning when he'd been charming and attentive, but as they'd become later instruments of control and pain. Around midnight, she heard a soft knock on her door. "Eliza, you awake?" Caleb's voice was quiet, careful not to startle her. "Yes." "Can I come in? Just to talk, I promise." She hesitated, then said yes. The door opened, and Caleb entered, carrying a lamp, still fully dressed, despite the late hour. He set the lamp on the dresser and sat in the chair by the window, maintaining a respectful distance. "Couldn't sleep either," he said. "Figured you might be having the same problem." "I keep thinking he's outside," Eliza admitted, "that he's already here, that any moment he'll break down the door." "He's not here. Pete and Samuel are both on watch tonight. I asked them to take shifts. No one's getting onto this property without us knowing about it." The knowledge should have comforted her, but fear wasn't rational. What if he has legal authority to take me back? What if the law is on his side? Caleb was quiet for a moment. "I talked to Sheriff Avery before we left. He explained some things. Wyoming Territory has different laws than the eastern states. Women have more rights here, can own property, vote. In some elections, control their own money. And judges here, they tend to favor individual liberty over Eastern legal precedents. If Nathaniel shows up with papers demanding your return, we can fight it in court. And we'd have a decent chance of winning. But not a guarantee." "No, not a guarantee." Caleb leaned forward, his expression serious. "Eliza, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Did you marry Nathaniel legally? Is there a valid marriage certificate?" Eliza nodded miserably. "Yes, we were married in a church in Boston. It's all legal and documented. And he never hurt you badly enough to seek medical help. No doctors who witnessed injuries. He was careful. He knew how to hurt me without leaving marks that would show. And when he did leave marks, he kept me inside until they healed." Her voice broke. "He was very good at it." Caleb's hands clenched into fists, then slowly relaxed. "All right, that makes it harder but not impossible. If you're willing, you could testify to the abuse. I could testify to your condition when you arrived, your fear, the bruises you had. Mrs. Whitford could testify. The sheriff could testify to tonight's events. We build a case that you left for your own safety, that returning you to Nathaniel would put your life in danger. Would that be enough?" "I don't know," Caleb admitted. "But it's something. And there's one other option." "What?" He took a deep breath. "You could marry me. Tonight. right now. We could ride into town, wake up Judge Morrison, and make it official. Wyoming recognizes new marriages over old ones in cases of abandonment and abuse. If you're legally married to me, it creates a legal tangle that would take Nathaniel months to fight through, and we could use that time to build our case. Eliza stared at him. You'd do that, marry me just to protect me. I wouldn't be marrying you just for that, Caleb said quietly. I'd be marrying you because I want to. Because these past 3 weeks, watching you heal and grow stronger, watching you smile more each day, watching you become part of this place, it's made me realize I want this to be real. I want you to stay. I want to build a life with you. The protection is part of it, yes, but it's not the only reason. Eliza's heart hammered against her ribs. This was too fast, too sudden. They barely knew each other. But then again, what did time matter? She'd known Nathaniel for 6 months before marrying him, and look how that had turned out. Sometimes you knew people in moments in the choices they made when it mattered. I can't ask you to do that, she whispered. You're not asking. I'm offering. But Eliza, if we do this, I need you to understand something. I'm not suggesting this as a temporary arrangement or a legal convenience. If you marry me, I'm going to treat it as a real marriage. I'm going to stand by you, protect you, build a life with you. The intimate aspects, those we still take at your pace, but the commitment itself that I take seriously. What if I can never be a real wife to you? Eliza asked, voicing her deepest fear. What if Nathaniel damaged me so badly that we can never? Caleb crossed the room and knelt beside her bed, taking her hand gently in his. Then we figure it out together. Eliza, I'm not going to lie and say that physical intimacy isn't something I hope for eventually. But it's not the foundation of what I'm offering you. The foundation is partnership, respect, trust. If we have those things, we can build whatever kind of marriage we both need. There's no single right way to be married. Tears slid down Eliza's cheeks. Why are you so kind to me? Because you deserve kindness. Because you've survived something terrible and come out the other side still fighting. Because when I look at you, I see strength and courage and the possibility of something good. He squeezed her hand gently. You don't have to decide tonight. But if Nathaniel is coming, and if you think marrying me would help keep you safe, then the offer stands. Today, tomorrow, next week, whenever you're ready. Eliza looked at this man kneeling beside her bed. This man who'd shown her more genuine care in 3 weeks than Nathaniel had shown her in years of marriage. She thought about running again, about spending the rest of her life looking over her shoulder, jumping at shadows. And she realized she was done running. Done letting Nathaniel dictate her choices. Done letting fear make her decisions. Ask me, she said. Caleb blinked. What? Ask me properly. To marry you. Not as a legal strategy or a protective measure. Ask me like you mean it. Understanding dawned in his eyes, and he took both her hands in his expression solemn. Eliza Rowan, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Would you build a life with me here at Clearwater Ranch, share my burdens and my joys, stand beside me through whatever comes? I promise to cherish you, protect you, respect you, and do everything in my power to make you happy. I can't promise perfection, but I can promise honesty and effort and loyalty. Will you marry me? The answer came easier than she'd expected. Yes. Caleb's face lit up with a smile so genuine it made her chest ache. Then let's go wake up Judge Morrison. They rode into Hawthorne through the darkness, just the two of them on horseback. Eliza sat in front of Caleb on his big bay gelding, his arms around her to hold the reins, and she let herself lean back against his chest, drawing comfort from his solid presence. The night was clear and cold, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds, and the steady rhythm of the horse's hooves matched the beating of her heart. Judge Morrison was not happy about being woken at 2 a.m, but when Caleb explained the situation, the investigator, the threat of Nathaniel, the need for legal protection, the old judge's expression softened. You love this girl, Mercer, he asked bluntly. I do, sir. And you, Miss Rowan, are you entering this marriage of your own free will? No coercion, no pressure. Eliza met his sharp gaze steadily. I am choosing this, Your Honor. I want to marry Caleb. The judge studied them both for a long moment, then nodded. All right then, let's make it official. We'll need witnesses. Mrs. Morrison, he called toward the bedroom, wake up and put on something decent. We're performing a marriage. 10 minutes later, they stood in the judge's parlor. Eliza in her borrowed blue dress, Caleb in his work clothes, both of them dusty from the ride. Judge Morrison performed the ceremony by lamplight, his words simple and direct, no flowery language or elaborate promises, just the essential question and the essential answer. Do you, Caleb James Mercer, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. And do you, Eliza Marie Rowan, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? Eliza's voice was steady when she answered. I do. Then by the power vested in me by Wyoming territory, I pronounce you husband and wife. Mr. Mercer, you may kiss your bride. Caleb looked at Eliza, a question in his eyes, and she nodded slightly. He leaned in and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead, chaste and sweet and respectful of her boundaries. It was perfect. They signed the marriage certificate, Mrs. Morrison and Sheriff Avery serving as witnesses. The sheriff had apparently been alerted to their midnight ride and shown up to ensure everything was above board. When it was done, when the ink was dry, and the certificate official, Eliza looked down at her signature and felt something shift fundamentally in her world. She was no longer Eliza Rowan, mail-order bride from Boston running from a nightmare. She was Eliza Mercer, wife of a Wyoming rancher building something new. The past wasn't erased, it would always be part of her story, but it no longer defined her future. Congratulations, Sheriff Avery said, shaking Caleb's hand. And good strategy. This will definitely complicate Blackwood's legal position if he shows up. Can't just drag a woman away from her husband without due process. That's the idea, Caleb agreed. They rode back to the ranch as the eastern sky began to lighten with the first hints of dawn. Eliza was exhausted, running on nerves and adrenaline, but also strangely exhilarated. She'd made a choice, a real choice. Not running away from something, but choosing something, someone. At the ranch, Caleb helped her dismount and walked her to the front door. They stood together on the porch, watching the sun rise over the plains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. You should get some rest, Caleb said. It's been a long night. What about you? Ranch doesn't stop for lack of sleep. I've got animals to feed and work to do, but I'll be around if you need anything. Eliza turned to face him, this man who was now her husband. Caleb, yes. Thank you for everything, for protecting me, for giving me a chance to choose. He touched her cheek gently, his calloused fingers warm against her skin. You gave me a chance too. That means everything. She went inside and collapsed onto her bed, still fully dressed, too tired to change. Sleep took her immediately, deep and dreamless. And when she woke hours later, her first thought was that something had changed. The fear that had been her constant companion for so long had diminished, replaced by something stronger. Hope. Purpose. The beginning of belonging. She was Eliza Mercer now. And that meant something. When Eliza woke, the sun was high in the sky, and the house was filled with the smell of bread baking. She lay still for a moment, disoriented, her left hand resting on her chest where she could feel the steady beat of her heart. Then she remembered. The investigator. The midnight ride. The marriage ceremony in Judge Morrison's parlor. She lifted her hand and looked at her ring finger bare, except for the pale indent where Nathaniel's ring had once sat. She'd sold that ring months ago to pay for her escape, and she hadn't mourned its loss for a second. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Eliza? You awake, dear? Mrs. Whitford's voice carried through the door. Yes, come in. The housekeeper entered carrying a tray with tea and toast. Figured you'd be hungry when you finally woke. It's past noon. Caleb told me what happened last night, all of it. She set the tray on the bedside table and studied Eliza with those sharp, knowing eyes. So you're Mrs. Mercer now. How does it feel? Strange, Eliza admitted, sitting up and accepting the cup of tea Mrs. Whitford offered. Like I'm wearing someone else's name, someone braver than me. You are brave, Mrs. Whitford said firmly. Bravest woman I've met in a long time. Takes courage to run from a bad situation. Takes even more courage to stop running and make a stand. Caleb chose well. I think I chose well too, Eliza said softly. surprising herself with the truth of it. Mrs. Whitford smiled. Good. Now eat something, then get yourself presentable. Half the county knows about last night by now. News travels fast out here, and there'll be folks stopping by to offer congratulations. Sarah Chen already brought by a pie this morning, and Martha Henderson said she'd come by this afternoon with some of her preserves. You're officially part of the community now. The thought of facing people made Eliza's stomach tighten with anxiety, but she forced herself to nod. She couldn't hide forever. Mrs. Whitford was right. She'd stopped running. That meant facing things head-on, even when it was uncomfortable. After eating and washing, Eliza changed into one of her simple dresses and braided her hair, securing it with pins. Looking in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked stronger somehow, less like a ghost. The shadows under her eyes remained, but there was color in her cheeks now, and her gaze no longer held that hunted quality that had defined her for so long. She found Caleb in the barn mucking out Stahl's hard, dirty work that he performed with methodical efficiency. He looked up when he heard her footsteps, and his face brightened with a smile that made something warm unfurl in her chest. "Hey," he said, leaning on the pitchfork. "You feeling better?" "A little. Mrs. Whitford said people have been coming by." "Yeah, word spread fast about the wedding. Don't worry, I've been running interference. But I figured eventually you'd want to come out and face the music. Folks mean well, even if their attention can be overwhelming." Eliza stepped closer, wrinkling her nose at the smell of manure and hay. "I wanted to talk to you about last night, about what happens now." Caleb set down the pitchfork and gave her his full attention. "All right. You married me to protect me," she said carefully. "I understand that was part of it, but we didn't really discuss what that means for our daily lives. Are things going to change between us?" "Only if you want them to," Caleb said. "Eliza, you're still welcome to your own room, your own space. I'm not expecting you to share my bed or play house or pretend this is something it's not. We married for legal protection, yes, but also because I genuinely wanted to. I meant every word I said in that ceremony, but the pace of everything else, that's still your choice." The relief that flooded through her was immediate and powerful. "Thank you. I needed to know I wasn't going to wake up one day and find that everything had changed, that expectations had shifted without my knowing." "Not going to happen. You'll always know where you stand with me, I promise." A voice called from outside the barn. "Caleb, Eliza." "You in there?" Sheriff Avery appeared in the doorway, his expression grim. "Sorry to interrupt, but we need to talk. I've got news, and it's not good." They followed him to the house where Mrs. Whitford had already set out coffee and settled into a chair at the kitchen table. The sheriff accepted a cup gratefully and took a long drink before speaking. "That investigator left town last night like I told him to, but he sent a telegram before he left. I know, because I have an arrangement with the telegraph operator. He lets me know when anything suspicious comes through." The message was addressed to Nathaniel Blackwood in Boston, and it said, quote, "Located subject in Hawthorne, Wyoming territory. Married local rancher named Caleb Mercer last night. Advise next steps." Eliza's hands trembled, and she set down her cup before she could drop it. "So Nathaniel knows exactly where I am. How long until he gets here?" "Train from Boston to Cheyenne takes about a week if he catches the right connections," the sheriff said. "Then it's another day's travel from Cheyenne to Hawthorne by stage. So we're looking at 8, maybe 10 days if he leaves immediately. That's assuming he drops everything and comes himself." "He will," Eliza said with certainty. "Nathaniel doesn't let other people handle things he considers important, and I'm important to him not because he loves me, but because I'm his property. He'll come himself." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Then we have 8 days to prepare." "Sheriff, what are our legal options?" "Limited, but not non-existent," Avery said. "The marriage helps Wyoming courts take a dim view of men trying to reclaim wives who've remarried, especially in cases involving documented abuse. But Blackwood's original marriage certificate is still valid in the eyes of many Eastern judges, and he could argue that your marriage to Eliza is fraudulent because she was already married when it occurred." "Is he right?" Caleb asked bluntly. The sheriff shrugged. "Depends on the judge. Some would say yes. The first marriage takes precedence. Others would say a woman fleeing abuse has the right to seek protection however she can find it, including remarriage. Judge Morrison knows the situation and will testify that Eliza entered the marriage freely and that it was performed in good faith. That carries weight. But it might not be enough, Eliza said quietly. It might not be enough, the sheriff agreed, which is why we need to build the strongest case possible. Eliza, I need you to write down everything. Every incident of abuse, every threat, every injury, dates. If you can remember them, details of what happened. I know it's painful, but we need documentation. And Caleb, Mrs. Whitford, both of you need to write statements about Eliza's condition when she arrived and your observations since then. What if Nathaniel shows up with legal authority to take her? Caleb asked. Some kind of warrant or court order. Then I'll slow him down as much as legally possible while we fight it in court. But I'll be honest with you both, if he shows up with proper legal documentation from a federal judge, my hands might be tied. Wyoming territory is still subject to federal law and spousal rights are complicated. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Eliza felt the walls closing and the brief illusion of safety crumbling. She'd been foolish to think marriage would solve everything, foolish to believe she could ever truly be free of Nathaniel's reach. There's one other option, Sheriff Avery said quietly. And I want to be clear, I'm not officially suggesting this. But if Blackwood shows up and tries to take Eliza by force, if he doesn't go through legal channels, then he's just another man committing assault. And Wyoming territory has very clear laws about a man's right to defend his home and his wife. The implication was clear. Caleb's expression didn't change, but Eliza saw his hands clench briefly before relaxing. I understand. Like I said, not official advice, just making sure you know your options. The sheriff stood. I'll keep you posted on any developments. And Caleb, you might want to make sure you and your men are ready, just in case. After the sheriff left, Eliza sat at the kitchen table, feeling numb. Mrs. Whitford busied herself with dishes, giving them privacy, and Caleb pulled a chair close to Eliza's and took her hand. We're going to get through this, he said. You can't know that. You can't promise that. No, I can't. But I can promise I'm going to do everything in my power to keep you safe, and I can promise you're not facing this alone. I should write that statement, Eliza said, her voice hollow. Document everything like the sheriff said. Make sure there's a record. Only if you're ready. We've got time. Do we? 8 days isn't time, Caleb. 8 days is nothing. But she went to her room anyway and pulled out paper and pen from the small writing desk Caleb had moved in for her. She sat for a long moment staring at the blank page, trying to figure out where to start. How did you summarize years of systematic cruelty in a way that would make sense to strangers? How did you make people understand that abuse wasn't always dramatic and visible, that sometimes it was 1,000 small cuts that bled you slowly? She started writing. Started with the day after the wedding, when Nathaniel had first shown his true nature, criticizing her dress, her posture, the way she'd spoken to one of his colleagues. Small things that had seemed like helpful corrections at the time. Then she wrote about the escalation, the restrictions on where she could go, who she could see, what she could spend money on. The way he'd isolated her from friends and family until she had no one to turn to. Then came the physical abuse. The first time he'd grabbed her arm hard enough to leave bruises, claiming she'd embarrassed him at a dinner party. The time he'd pushed her into a wall because she'd questioned one of his decisions. The night he'd hit her hard enough to split her lip, then apologized so profusely, so convincingly, that she'd actually believed it was her fault for provoking him. She wrote for hours, filling page after page with painful memories she'd tried so hard to bury. Her hand cramped, and her eyes burned, but she kept writing because the sheriff was right. They needed documentation. They needed proof. And maybe, just maybe, putting it all down on paper would help her finally exorcise these demons. When she finally emerged from her room, evening had fallen, and Caleb was sitting on the porch with Pete and Samuel, the three men talking in low voices. They fell silent when she appeared, and Caleb stood immediately. You all right? I wrote it all down, everything I could remember. Her voice broke. It's worse seeing it all written out, seeing exactly how many times he hurt me, how many different ways. I kept thinking each incident was isolated, that he'd changed, that I could fix things. But looking at it all together, seeing the pattern, God, I was such a fool. You weren't a fool, Caleb said fiercely, crossing to her and taking her shoulders gently. You were a woman trying to survive an impossible situation. None of what he did was your fault, Eliza. None of it. She wanted to believe him, but the shame still sat heavy in her chest. Shame that she'd stayed so long, that she'd believed Nathaniel's lies, that she'd let herself become so diminished. Pete and Samuel had stood as well, both men looking uncomfortable but determined. Pete, the older of the two, cleared his throat. "Ma'am, Mrs. Mercer, we just want you to know, Caleb filled us in on the situation. If this Blackwood fellow shows up causing trouble, he's going to find out real quick that we protect our own out here. You're part of this ranch now. That makes you family." Samuel nodded agreement. "I got 3 sisters back in Missouri. One of them had a husband who treated her bad. I know what that kind of man looks like, and I know they don't stop unless someone makes them stop. So if it comes to that, you can count on us." Eliza felt tears prick at her eyes. "Thank you, both of you. I never thought strangers would stand up for me like this." "We're not strangers anymore," Pete said simply. "We're your people now." The next several days passed in a strange combination of normalcy and tension. Eliza tried to maintain her usual routines, working in the garden with Mrs. Whitford, learning to manage the household accounts, practicing her writing on Daisy. But underneath everything was the constant awareness that Nathaniel was coming, that the confrontation she'd been running from for months was now inevitable. Caleb showed her how to load and fire his shotgun, insisting she know how to protect herself if necessary. The first time she pulled the trigger and felt the weapon's kick against her shoulder, she'd been terrified. But after several sessions, she began to feel more confident. It was empowering in a strange way, knowing she had the means to defend herself, that she wasn't helpless. Neighbors stopped by regularly, bringing food and support and offers of help. Sarah Chen came by almost daily sometimes just to sit with Eliza and talk, providing friendship and distraction. Martha Henderson brought her son James, who was skilled with carpentry, and he spent an afternoon reinforcing the locks on all the doors and windows. The community was circling the wagons, preparing to protect one of their own. On the 5th day, Caleb asked Eliza to take a ride with him. They saddled up Eliza on Daisy, Caleb on his bay gelding, and rode out across the ranch, following the creek upstream to a place Eliza had never been before. The land here was more broken, with rocky outcroppings and clusters of pine trees, and when they crested a small rise, Eliza gasped at the view. The entire valley spread out below them, the ranch buildings tiny in the distance, the plains stretching endlessly toward the horizon. It was beautiful and vast, and made her feel simultaneously insignificant and part of something much larger than herself. "This is the highest point on the property," Caleb said, dismounting and helping Eliza down. "Sarah loved it up here, said it gave her perspective when things felt overwhelming." They sat on a flat rock overlooking the valley, shoulders almost touching, and Eliza felt some of the tension in her body ease. Up here, Nathaniel and his threats seemed far away, less real. "I've been thinking," Caleb said after a while, "about what happens after we deal with Blackwood, assuming everything works out in our favor. I've been thinking about what kind of life we might build together." "What do you mean?" "I mean, we got married fast under pressure without really talking about what we both want long term. And I know right now you're focused on survival, which is completely understandable. But eventually the crisis will pass, and then we'll have to figure out what our marriage actually looks like, what we both need from it." Eliza pulled her knees to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. "I don't know if I can be what you need. A real wife." "Then tell me what you can be. Tell me what you need from me. Let's talk about this honestly." She took a deep breath, gathering courage. "I need safety. I need to know that my body is my own, that I have control over it. I need patience. I need to not be afraid in my own home." "All of that is reasonable. All of that I can give you. What else?" "I need purpose. I need to feel useful, like I'm contributing something real. I don't want to just be someone you take care of. I want to be a partner, like you said, someone who pulls their weight." "You're already doing that," Caleb said. "The garden's thriving because of you. The house runs smoother, and you're learning fast. The bookkeeping you've taken over has saved me hours each week. You're not a burden, Eliza. You're an asset." The word asset made her flinch slightly, and Caleb noticed immediately. "Sorry, bad word choice. You're not an asset. You're a person, a partner, someone I value beyond any practical contribution. I just meant you're already pulling your weight and then some. You don't need to prove anything. It's hard not to feel like I need to prove I deserve to be here, Eliza admitted. Like I need to earn my place every single day. You deserve to be here just by existing, by choosing to be here, nothing else required. Caleb paused. Can I tell you what I need? Yes. I need honesty. I need you to tell me when something's wrong, when I've crossed a line, when you need space. I need you to trust me enough to be real with me, even when it's uncomfortable. He struggled for words. I need to know this is real for you too, that you're not just here because you had nowhere else to go, that you're choosing me, choosing this life, not just accepting it as the lesser of two evils. His vulnerability caught her off guard. She'd been so focused on her own fears that she hadn't considered that he might have his own, that he might be uncertain about where he stood with her. I am choosing you, she said quietly. I was terrified when I got off that train, and yes, I was running from something terrible. But these past weeks getting to know you, seeing how you treat people, how you run this ranch, how you've been with me, I'm not just accepting this situation anymore, Caleb. I'm actively choosing it, choosing you. The relief on his face was palpable. That means more than you know. I can't promise I'll be ready for everything right away, she continued. The physical side of marriage, that's still scary for me. Nathaniel made that part of my life into something painful and degrading, and I don't know how long it'll take to undo that damage. However long it takes is fine, and if it never happens, we'll figure out a different way. There's no timeline here, Eliza, no pressure. She reached out and took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. It was the most intimate contact they'd had since the brief kiss at their wedding, and her heart raced with a combination of fear and something else. Something that might have been the beginning of desire buried under layers of trauma, but not entirely dead. Thank you, she whispered, for being patient, for being kind, for being so different from what I expected. Caleb squeezed her hand gently. Thank you for giving me a chance, for trusting me enough to try. They sat together as the sun began its descent, painting the sky in brilliant colors, and Eliza felt something shift inside her. The fear was still there. It might always be there to some degree, but it no longer consumed her. She was more than her trauma, more than Nathaniel's victim. She was Eliza Mercer, and she was building a life worth fighting for. On the 8th day, the telegraph operator rode out to the ranch with a message. Nathaniel Blackwood had arrived in Cheyenne and would be in Hawthorne the following day. The house became a flurry of activity. Pete and Samuel checked weapons and positioned themselves strategically around the property. Sheriff Avery stopped by to review the plan. He would be present when Nathaniel arrived, ready to intervene if necessary. Judge Morrison sent word that he'd reviewed Eliza's written testimony and found it compelling, and that he would rule in her favor if the case came before him. Mrs. Whitford, ever practical, made sure everyone was fed and that there were extra provisions in the house. No sense facing trouble on an empty stomach, she said firmly, ladling stew into bowls. Eliza barely slept that night. She lay in her bed listening to the house settle around her, knowing that somewhere in a hotel in Cheyenne, Nathaniel was doing the same. Planning, strategizing, preparing to take back what he considered his property. But she wasn't his property anymore. She was her own person, legally married to another man, surrounded by people who would stand with her. And if Nathaniel thought he could simply show up and drag her back to Boston, he was about to learn that Wyoming territory operated by different rules. Morning came too quickly. Eliza dressed carefully, choosing the blue dress Sarah Chen had lent her for the barn dance. It felt right. Somehow wearing something borrowed from a friend, something that symbolized her connection to this community. She braided her hair and pinned it securely, checked her reflection in the mirror, and saw a woman who looked stronger than she felt. Caleb was waiting in the kitchen with coffee. He looked tired, his eyes shadowed from lack of sleep, but his expression was determined. Whatever happens today, he said, you're not alone. Remember that. I know. She accepted the coffee cup and wrapped her hands around it, drawing warmth and comfort. I'm scared, but I'm ready. I think, as ready as I'll ever be. That's all any of us can be. They drank their coffee in silence, waiting. Pete came in to report that he and Samuel had the perimeter secured. Sheriff Avery arrived just after 9 o'clock, his badge polished and his expression all business. Sarah Chen showed up shortly after announcing that she wasn't about to miss this. "I've got nothing better to do," she said when Caleb questioned her presence. "And besides, the more witnesses, the better. Nathaniel Blackwood might be used to controlling situations in Boston, but let's see how he handles a crowd." By 10 o'clock, half a dozen other neighbors had arrived, all of them finding excuses to stop by that morning. Word had spread, and the community was making its position clear. Eliza had their support, and Nathaniel would have to go through all of them to get to her. The stagecoach from Cheyenne usually arrived around 11. At 1:15, they heard the sound of hooves and wheels on the road. Eliza's heart hammered so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. Caleb took her hand and squeezed it gently. "You've got this," he murmured. "You're stronger than him now." The stagecoach pulled to a stop in front of the house, and a man climbed out. Even from a distance, even after all these months, Eliza recognized him instantly. Nathaniel Blackwood stepped onto Wyoming soil, looking every inch the Boston gentleman, expensive suit, polished shoes, silver-tipped walking cane. He was handsome in a cold sort of way, with sharp features and pale blue eyes that Eliza had once found attractive, but now only saw as calculating. He surveyed the assembled crowd with obvious disdain, his gaze finally landing on Eliza, standing on the porch between Caleb and Sheriff Avery. His expression flickered surprise, anger, possessiveness, before settling into a mask of concerned civility. "Eliza," he said, his voice carrying across the yard with practiced authority. "Thank God I found you. I've been worried sick. Come along now. Let's end this foolishness and go home." Eliza's first instinct was to retreat, to make herself small and obedient, the way she'd learned to do to survive. But Caleb's hand remained steady in hers, and she could feel the support of everyone surrounding her. She was not the woman who'd fled Boston in terror 6 months ago. She was Eliza Mercer, and she had found her voice. "No," she said, and the single word rang out clear and strong. "I'm not going anywhere with you, Nathaniel. This is my home now." His mask slipped slightly, revealing the anger beneath. "Don't be ridiculous. You're my wife. You belong with me in Boston. Whatever delusion you've been living under out here, she's not your wife." Caleb interrupted, his voice calm but laced with steel. "She's mine. We were married 8 days ago in a legal ceremony. You have no claim on her anymore." Nathaniel's eyes narrowed dangerously as they focused on Caleb for the first time. "And you must be the rancher who took advantage of a confused and traumatized woman. Do you have any idea the legal trouble you're in? Eliza was already married when she entered into this fraudulent arrangement with you. That makes your marriage invalid and makes you guilty of harboring a fugitive wife." "That's not how we see it in Wyoming," Sheriff Avery said, stepping forward. "Mr. Blackwood, I'm Sheriff Thomas Avery. Before this goes any further, I need to make something clear. Mrs. Mercer, that's what we call her here, came to this territory of her own free will, fleeing documented abuse. She is remarried legally under Wyoming law. If you have a problem with that, you're welcome to take it up with our territorial court system. But you're not taking her anywhere today." Nathaniel's smile was thin and dangerous. "I have legal documentation right here." He pulled papers from his jacket, proving that Eliza is legally my wife and has been since 1873. "I also have a warrant from a federal judge demanding her return to Boston to face charges of theft and abandonment of marital duties." The words theft hit Eliza like a physical blow. "I didn't steal anything from you." "You stole yourself," Nathaniel said coldly, his mask finally dropping completely. "You're my property, Eliza. My wife purchased through proper marriage. You took my money to fund your escape. You took jewelry that belonged to my family, and you violated your sacred vows. You're coming back with me, and when we get to Boston, you're going to pay for every moment of inconvenience you've caused me." The threat in his voice was unmistakable, and Eliza saw several of the assembled neighbors react with shock. Whatever doubts anyone might have had about her story evaporated in the face of Nathaniel's unveiled cruelty. "Mr. Blackwood," Judge Morrison's voice cut through the tension. Eliza hadn't seen him arrive, but the old judge now stood at the edge of the crowd, his expression stern. "I performed the marriage ceremony between Mrs. Mercer and Mr. Caleb Mercer. I have reviewed Mrs. Mercer's testimony regarding the abuse she suffered at your hands. I have also reviewed Wyoming territorial law regarding spousal rights and protections. Your warrant may be valid in federal court, But while you're in my jurisdiction, Wyoming law takes precedence. And Wyoming law says a woman has the right to flee an abusive marriage and seek protection elsewhere, including through remarriage. That's preposterous. Nathaniel snarled, his composure completely gone now. She's my wife. Mine. I own her. You own nothing here, Caleb said quietly, and something in his tone made Nathaniel take a step back. You don't own Eliza. You don't own her choices. You don't own her future. Whatever you had in Boston, it ends here. Leave now, while you still can. Are you threatening me? I'm giving you good advice. You're outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and out of your depth. This isn't Boston Blackwood. Your money and your connections don't mean anything here. All that matters is whether you're a decent human being, and from what I can see, you fall far short of that standard. Nathaniel's face flushed with rage. He moved toward the porch, clearly intending to grab Eliza, but Pete and Samuel materialized on either side of him, blocking his path. Sheriff Avery's hand moved to his gun. That's far enough, the sheriff said. Mr. Blackwood, you have two options. You can leave Hawthorne peacefully and take your complaints to territorial court in Cheyenne, where they'll be properly adjudicated. Or you can try to take Mrs. Mercer by force, at which point I'll arrest you for assault and attempted kidnapping. Your choice. For a long moment, Nathaniel stood frozen, clearly weighing his options. Eliza could see him calculating, trying to figure out if his power and influence could overcome the united front facing him. She knew that expression, had seen it 1,000 times when he was deciding how to punish her for some perceived slight. But then his gaze landed on her again, and she saw something shift in his eyes. He was looking at her, really looking at her for the first time, and she realized he was seeing something he hadn't expected. She wasn't cowering, wasn't begging, wasn't the broken woman he'd expected to find. She was standing tall, surrounded by people who valued her, married to a man who respected her, and she was looking at him without fear. "You've changed," he said, and there was something almost like confusion in his voice. "Yes," Eliza said simply. "I have. I'm not yours anymore, Nathaniel. I'm not anyone's property. I'm just myself, and I'm never coming back to you." For a moment, just a moment, she thought she saw something like pain flicker across his face, but then it was gone, replaced by cold hatred. "This isn't over," he said. "I'll take this to every court in the country if I have to. You're my wife, Eliza. That's a fact no frontier court can change." "Then I guess we'll see you in court," Judge Morrison said. "But for now, Mr. Blackwood, you need to leave this property. You're not welcome here." Nathaniel looked around at the assembled crowd one more time, his expression venomous, then turned and stalked back to the stagecoach. Before climbing in, he looked back at Eliza one final time. "You'll regret this," he said. "All of you will regret this." Then he was gone, the stagecoach pulling away in a cloud of dust, and Eliza felt her legs give out. Caleb caught her before she hit the ground, supporting her weight as she sagged against him, all the adrenaline draining away at once. "You did it," he murmured into her hair. "You stood up to him. You were magnificent." "He's not going to stop," Eliza whispered. "You heard him. He'll take this to court. He'll keep fighting." "Then we'll keep fighting too," Sheriff Avery said. "And we'll win. Because unlike in Boston out here, we believe a woman has the right to choose her own life. Judge Morrison, what are our next steps?" The judge was already making notes. "I'll file a formal petition with the territorial court establishing Mrs. Mercer's right to her current marriage based on documented abuse and her genuine fear for her safety. I'll request that any federal warrants be suspended pending territorial review. It'll take time, but I believe we have a strong case." Sarah Chen hugged Eliza tightly. "You were so brave. I'm proud of you." One by one, the neighbors came forward with words of support and encouragement. They'd witnessed Nathaniel's cruelty firsthand, now had seen the mask slip and the monster beneath revealed. Whatever sympathy anyone might have had for a husband seeking his lost wife evaporated in the face of his naked possessiveness and threats. As the crowd began to disperse, Eliza stood with Caleb on the porch, watching the dust from the stagecoach finally settle. Her hands were still shaking, but she felt something new rising in her chest. Not just relief, but triumph. She'd faced the man who'd haunted her nightmares, and she'd survived. More than survived, she'd stood her ground. "Thank you," she said to Caleb, "for standing with me, for not backing down. Always, he said simply. That's what marriage means, Eliza. Standing together, facing things together. You're not alone in this fight. And looking around at the ranch that had become her home, at the people who'd become her community, at the man who'd become her husband, Eliza Mercer finally let herself believe it. She wasn't alone. She had found her people. She had found her place. And she was going to fight like hell to keep it. The weeks following Nathaniel's departure were strange ones. Eliza found herself caught between relief and anticipation, never quite able to relax because she knew the legal battle was only beginning. True to his word, Nathaniel filed motions in federal court demanding her return, claiming their marriage superseded any subsequent union, and that Wyoming territory had no authority to harbor a fugitive wife. Judge Morrison countered with his own filings documenting the abuse and arguing that Wyoming law explicitly protected women fleeing domestic violence. The paperwork flew back and forth between Hawthorne and various courthouses across the country, each motion and counter-motion bringing new waves of anxiety. But gradually, as autumn began to paint the plains in shades of gold and amber, something unexpected happened. Eliza began to heal. It started small. One morning she woke up and realized she hadn't had a nightmare about Nathaniel in 3 days. Another day she caught herself laughing at something Pete said, a genuine belly laugh that surprised her with its spontaneity. She started sleeping more soundly, eating more heartily, and the hollow look that had defined her features for so long began to fill out with health and contentment. Caleb noticed the changes, though he never commented directly. Instead, he simply continued being himself, steady, kind patient. He taught her more about ranching, showed her how to doctor a sick calf, explained the economics of cattle prices and land management. He treated her like a true partner, asking her opinion on decisions and actually listening to her answers. And slowly, carefully, Eliza found herself falling in love with him. It wasn't the desperate, clinging love she'd mistaken for affection with Nathaniel. It wasn't the fairy tale romance she'd imagined as a girl. It was something quieter and deeper, built on respect and trust, and the simple pleasure of working side by side toward common goals. It was watching him gentle a skittish horse with infinite patience and knowing he'd shown her that same patience. It was the way he always made sure she had the comfortable chair by the fire. It was the small smile he gave her across the dinner table when Mrs. Whitford told an outrageous story about the early days of the ranch. It was safety and partnership and the gradual understanding that this was what love was supposed to feel like. 6 weeks after Nathaniel's visit, a letter arrived from Judge Morrison. Eliza's hand shook as she opened it, Caleb standing close enough to catch her if her knees buckled. The federal court in Chicago had reviewed the case and issued a preliminary ruling. While Nathaniel's original marriage to Eliza remained technically valid under federal law, the court acknowledged Wyoming Territory's right to protect residents from documented abuse. More significantly, 3 witnesses had come forward in Boston, former servants in the Blackwood household, who corroborated Eliza's testimony about Nathaniel's violence. Their statements, combined with Eliza's own detailed documentation and Judge Morrison's expert testimony about Wyoming law, had convinced the judge to suspend any warrants for Eliza's return pending a full hearing. The hearing was scheduled for spring. Until then, Eliza was free to remain in Wyoming Territory under Caleb's protection. The preliminary ruling noted that if the abuse could be proven to the court's satisfaction during the full hearing, Eliza's marriage to Nathaniel could potentially be annulled on grounds of extreme cruelty, which would validate her subsequent marriage to Caleb. "We're winning," Caleb said quietly, reading over her shoulder. "Eliza, we're actually winning." She couldn't speak, could only press the letter to her chest and let the tears come, tears of relief, of hope, of gratitude for every person who'd stood with her when standing alone would have been impossible. That night after supper, Eliza asked Caleb to walk with her down to the creek. The evening was cool, but not cold, and the sky was beginning to fill with stars. They'd walked this path so many times over the past months that Eliza's feet knew every stone and root could have found the way blindfolded. At their favorite spot by the water, Eliza turned to face Caleb, gathering her courage for what she needed to say. "I want to thank you," she began, "for everything you've done for me, for giving me a home when I had nowhere to go, for protecting me, for being patient while I figured out how to be a person again." "You don't need to thank me for any of that," Caleb said. "It's what anyone decent would do." "No," Eliza said firmly. "It's not. Most men wouldn't have given me a choice about anything. Most men would have expected things from me, would have demanded their rights as a husband. But you've given me nothing but time and space and kindness. And I want you to know that it's worked. You've helped me heal in ways I didn't think were possible. Caleb's expression softened. I'm glad. That's all I wanted, for you to feel safe enough to heal. But here's the thing, Eliza continued, her heart racing. I don't just want to feel safe anymore. I want to feel alive. I want to live, really live, not just survive. And I want to do that with you. Not because I'm grateful or obligated, but because I choose it. Because I choose you. She saw understanding dawn in his eyes, saw hope flare there along with something deeper. Eliza, what are you saying? I'm saying I love you. She said, the words coming easier than she'd expected. I'm saying I'm ready to be your wife in every sense of the word. I'm saying I trust you, Caleb Mercer, and I want to build a real marriage with you, if you still want that, if I haven't taken too long. He kissed her before she could finish, a gentle kiss that held years of loneliness and hope and careful patience finally rewarded. When he pulled back, his eyes were bright with emotion. I love you too, he said. I've loved you for weeks now, maybe longer. I just didn't want to pressure you, didn't want you to feel like you owed me anything. I don't feel pressured. I feel free. She kissed him again, longer this time, and felt desire unfurl in her belly, tentative and uncertain but real. I'm scared, she admitted. Nathaniel made that part of marriage into something terrible. I don't know if I'll be good at this. I don't know if I can be what you need. Then we'll figure it out together, Caleb said. Slowly, carefully, at your pace. And if you need to stop at any point, we stop. No questions asked. This isn't about what I need from you, Eliza. It's about what we build together. They walked back to the ranch hand in hand, and when they reached the house, Caleb paused at the door to his bedroom, the room he'd occupied alone since Sarah's death 4 years earlier. Would you like to come in? He asked, making it clear it was an invitation, not an expectation. Eliza took a deep breath and nodded. Yes, I would. What happened in that room was private and sacred, a tender reclamation of something Nathaniel had tried to destroy. Caleb was patient and gentle, constantly checking to make sure she was comfortable, ready to stop at the slightest sign of distress. And though there were moments when Eliza's body tensed with remembered fear, Caleb's kindness and the trust she'd built in him carried her through. By the time they lay together afterward, Eliza's head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, she felt fundamentally changed. Not fixed. Healing wasn't that simple, but transformed. Nathaniel no longer owned this part of her. She'd taken it back, and she'd chosen to share it with someone worthy. Thank you, she whispered into the darkness. For what? For being patient, for being gentle, for making that something beautiful instead of something I had to endure. Caleb's arms tightened around her. Thank you for trusting me, for giving us both a chance at happiness. They fell asleep tangled together, and when Eliza woke in the morning to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows, she felt at peace for the first time in years. The months leading up to the spring hearing passed in a blur of ranch work and preparation. Judge Morrison worked tirelessly on their case, gathering testimony and building their legal defense. The 3 servants who'd come forward in Boston, a cook, a housemaid, and a stable hand, provided devastating testimony about what they'd witnessed in the Blackwood household. One of them, the housemaid named Margaret, wrote directly to Eliza apologizing for not speaking up sooner. I was afraid of losing my position, Margaret wrote. Mr. Blackwood paid well, and my family needed the money. But when I heard he was trying to force you back, I couldn't stay silent anymore. No amount of money is worth letting that man hurt you again. Please forgive me for my cowardice. Eliza wrote back immediately, assuring Margaret that she understood and was grateful for her courage now. The letter felt like closing a circle, like the past was finally being acknowledged and addressed instead of hidden away. Winter came to Wyoming with brutal force, blanketing the ranch in snow and testing everyone's endurance. But Eliza found she loved the winter in ways that surprised her. She loved the fierce beauty of it, the way the plains transformed into something pristine and otherworldly. She loved the enforced closeness of being snowed in the long evenings by the fire with Caleb, the way Mrs. Whitford taught her to make preserves and cure meat, and manage all the domestic tasks that kept a ranch household running. She also discovered she was pregnant. The realization came gradually missed courses. Morning queasiness, a strange fatigue that no amount of sleep seemed to cure. Mrs. Whitford noticed first, her experienced eyes taking in the signs Eliza had been too distracted to recognize. "When are you going to tell him?" Mrs. Whitford asked one morning when Eliza bolted from the breakfast table, hand over her mouth. "Tell who what?" Mrs. Whitford gave her a knowing look. "Tell Caleb you're carrying his child." Eliza stared at her. How did you—" "I've seen enough pregnant women in my life to recognize the signs. You're about 6 weeks along, I'd guess. Does Caleb know?" "No, I wasn't even sure myself until you just said it." Eliza sank into a chair, her mind reeling. A baby. She was going to have a baby. After everything with Nathaniel, after all the trauma and healing, she was going to be a mother. The thought terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. She told Caleb that evening, pulling him aside after supper with nervous hands and a racing heart. "I have something to tell you," she said, "and I don't know how you're going to feel about it." Caleb's expression immediately grew concerned. "What's wrong? Is it the legal case? Did something happen?" "No, nothing like that. Caleb, I'm pregnant." The words hung in the air between them for a heartbeat, 2 heartbeats, 3. Then Caleb's face transformed with joy so profound it made Eliza's eyes sting with tears. "Pregnant? You're sure?" "Mrs. Whitford is sure, and my body seems to agree. So yes, I'm sure." Caleb let out a whoop of pure happiness and swept her into his arms, spinning her around before setting her down carefully as if she were made of glass. "We're having a baby! Eliza, we're having a baby!" His joy was contagious, washing away Eliza's fears. "You're happy about this?" "Happy. I'm ecstatic. I never thought—" "After Sarah and the baby we lost, I never let myself hope for this again. But Eliza, a child with you. That's everything I could have wanted." They held each other as the reality sank in, and Eliza felt another piece of her heart heal. She was going to be a mother. She was going to bring a child into a home filled with love and safety, the exact opposite of what her own marriage to Nathaniel had been. This child would never know fear in their own home, would never see their mother hurt or diminished, would grow up knowing that love was supposed to be gentle and kind. "I'm scared," she admitted. "What if I'm not a good mother? What if I don't know how to do this?" "Then we'll figure it out together," Caleb said, echoing the words he'd said so many times before, just like everything else. Spring arrived with the usual fanfare of melting snow and mud and the first green shoots pushing through the earth. And with spring came the summons to Chicago for the final hearing in the case of Blackwood versus Mercer. Judge Morrison made the journey with them, along with Sheriff Avery and Mrs. Whitford, who insisted she wasn't letting Eliza face this alone. The train ride east felt surreal. Eliza was traveling the same route in reverse that had brought her to Wyoming almost a year ago, but everything was different now. Then she'd been running alone, terrified and desperate. Now she was surrounded by people who loved her, carrying Caleb's child, fighting not just for her freedom, but for the life they'd built together. The federal courthouse in Chicago was imposing all marble columns and stern-faced judges. Nathaniel was already there with his lawyers, looking as polished and controlled as ever. But when his eyes met Eliza's across the courtroom, she didn't flinch. She met his gaze steadily, one hand resting protectively on her still flat stomach, and she saw something shift in his expression. Recognition that he'd truly lost her, that whatever control he'd once had was gone forever. The hearing lasted 3 days. Nathaniel's lawyers argued that marriage was a sacred institution and that Eliza's flight represented a violation of her sacred vows. They claimed she'd stolen money and jewelry, that she'd abandoned her duties, that she had no right to remarry while her first husband still lived. But then Judge Morrison presented their case, the testimony from the servants, Eliza's detailed documentation of abuse, medical evidence from a doctor in Hawthorne who'd examined the scars Nathaniel's violence had left, Sheriff Avery's testimony about Nathaniel's threats and behavior when he'd come to Wyoming, Caleb's testimony about Eliza's condition when she'd first arrived, terrified, malnourished, covered in fading bruises. And finally, Eliza herself took the stand and told her story. She spoke clearly and calmly, describing the systematic abuse, the isolation, the fear that had defined her marriage to Nathaniel. She described the day she'd finally run the months of hiding the desperation that had led her to answer a mail-order bride advertisement from a stranger in Wyoming. And she described what she'd found there: safety, respect, partnership, and eventually love. "Mr. Blackwood wants this court to send me back to him," she said, looking directly at the judge. "He wants you to rule that his legal claim on me supersedes my right to safety and self-determination. But I'm asking this court to recognize that marriage should not be a prison sentence, that a woman who flees for her life should not be forced to return to her abuser simply because she once spoke vows to him. I am not property. I am a human being with the right to choose who I give my life to. And I choose Caleb Mercer. I choose Wyoming. I choose freedom." When she finished, the courtroom was silent. Even Nathaniel's lawyers seemed at a loss for words. The judge took a recess to review all the evidence and testimony. Those 2 hours felt like years. Eliza sat with Caleb's hand clasped in hers, praying to a God she wasn't sure she believed in anymore, begging for justice, for mercy, for the chance to keep the life she'd built. When the judge returned, his expression was grave. He looked at Nathaniel, then at Eliza, then at the assembled lawyers. "I have reviewed all testimony and evidence presented in this case," he said. "The question before this court is whether federal marriage law supersedes territorial protection statutes in cases of documented domestic violence. This is not a simple question, and reasonable people could disagree on the answer." Eliza's heart sank. They were going to lose. She was going to be sent back to Nathaniel. "However," the judge continued, "after careful consideration, I find that the evidence of abuse in this case is overwhelming and credible. 3 independent witnesses have corroborated Mrs. Mercer's testimony. Medical evidence supports her claims of physical violence, and Mr. Blackwood's own behavior and statements, as documented by Sheriff Avery, demonstrate a possessive and controlling attitude inconsistent with a loving marital relationship." Nathaniel's face flushed red, but he remained silent. "Therefore, I am ruling in favor of Mrs. Mercer. Her marriage to Nathaniel Blackwood is hereby annulled on grounds of extreme cruelty and abuse. Her subsequent marriage to Caleb Mercer is recognized as valid and legal. Mr. Blackwood's claims are denied, and he is ordered to pay all court costs. Furthermore, Mr. Blackwood is hereby enjoined from contacting Mrs. Mercer or traveling to Wyoming Territory to harass her. Any violation of this order will result in immediate arrest and prosecution." The gavel came down with a finality that echoed through the courtroom like thunder. Eliza couldn't breathe, couldn't process what she'd just heard. They'd won. She was free. Truly, legally free. Caleb pulled her into his arms, and she felt tears streaming down her face, tears of relief, of joy, of gratitude so profound it threatened to overwhelm her. Around them, their supporters erupted in celebration. Mrs. Whitford was crying openly. Sheriff Avery was shaking Judge Morrison's hand. Even the bailiff was smiling. Across the courtroom, Nathaniel stood frozen, his lawyers gathering papers with defeated expressions. He looked at Eliza one final time, and she saw the exact moment he truly understood that it was over, that his wealth and power and sense of entitlement had failed him, that he'd lost. "Goodbye, Nathaniel," Eliza said quietly, the words more for herself than for him. "I hope you learned something from this. I hope you become a better person. But either way, you're not my problem anymore." He didn't respond, just turned and walked out of the courtroom, his footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. Eliza watched him go and felt nothing. No anger, no fear, no lingering attachment. He was just a man now, stripped of the power she'd once given him, and she was finally free to move on. The journey back to Wyoming was joyous. They celebrated on the train with sandwiches and lemonade and wild plans for the future. Caleb wanted to expand the ranch, maybe add sheep to their cattle operation. Mrs. Whitford wanted to plant a bigger garden, maybe start selling vegetables in town. Sheriff Avery wanted to organize a proper town celebration when they got back. And Eliza wanted to watch her belly grow with their child, wanted to teach that child to ride horses and love the land, wanted to grow old with Caleb on their ranch, wanted to be part of the community that had saved her life in every way that mattered. When they finally returned to Clearwater Ranch, the entire town had turned out to welcome them home. A banner hung across the main street reading, "Welcome home, Mrs. Mercer," and tables of food had been set up in the town square. It was a celebration not just of their legal victory, but of something larger, a community standing together to protect one of their own, proving that justice and compassion could triumph over power and control. Sarah Chen hugged Eliza tightly. "We're so proud of you. You've given hope to every woman who's ever felt trapped." Martha Henderson pressed a package into her hands. "We took up a collection. Got you some things for the baby. Hope you don't mind, but Mrs. Whitford let slip about your condition." Eliza laughed through tears. "I don't mind at all. Thank you, all of you. I wouldn't have survived this without your support." That night, Eliza and Caleb stood on their porch, watching the sun set over the plains, painting the sky in brilliant colors. Eliza's hand rested on her stomach where their child grew, and Caleb's arm was around her shoulders, solid and warm. "Do you remember what you said to me the day I arrived?" Eliza asked. "I said a lot of things that day. You said fear has no place in our home. That was the moment everything changed for me, the moment I started to believe I could survive this." "And look at you now," Caleb said softly. "You didn't just survive. You thrived. You built a life. You became part of a community. You fought for your freedom and won. I'm so proud of you, Eliza. I couldn't have done it without you, without this place, these people. Wyoming saved my life." "You saved your own life," Caleb corrected. "We just gave you a safe place to do it." They stood together as darkness fell, and stars began to appear, and Eliza felt a peace so profound it brought tears to her eyes. This was home. This ranch, this man, this life they were building together. She'd traveled 2,000 miles running from a nightmare, and she'd found something she hadn't even known to hope for: a real partnership, a real home, real love. 5 months later, on a bright October morning with autumn colors blazing across the plains, Eliza gave birth to a daughter. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Eliza was transported back to her fears about Sarah's death, about losing this child or herself. But Mrs. Whitford was there, experienced and calm, guiding her through each contraction. And Caleb was there holding her hand, whispering encouragement, being the partner she needed. When the baby finally arrived, red-faced and screaming with healthy lungs, Eliza held her daughter and felt her heart expand in ways she hadn't known were possible. This tiny person, this perfect miracle was hers, was theirs, would grow up knowing only love and safety. "What should we name her?" Caleb asked, his voice thick with emotion as he touched the baby's tiny hand with his rough, calloused finger. Eliza had thought about this for months. "Hope," she said. "Her name is Hope, because that's what she represents. That's what this whole life represents." Caleb kissed her forehead, then the baby's. "Hope Mercer. It's perfect." The community welcomed Hope with the same enthusiasm they'd shown Eliza. Gifts poured in hand-knitted blankets, carved wooden toys, offers of help and support. Sarah Chen brought meals for the first week so Eliza could rest and recover. Martha Henderson organized a quilting circle to make a special blanket documenting Hope's birth. Judge Morrison rode out personally to deliver official birth documents, establishing Hope as a citizen of Wyoming Territory and legal daughter of Caleb and Eliza Mercer. As winter settled over the ranch, once again Eliza fell into the rhythms of motherhood. The sleepless nights, the endless feedings, the simple wonder of watching her daughter grow and change each day. Caleb was a devoted father, taking shifts with Hope, so Eliza could sleep singing lullabies in his rough voice, teaching the baby to grip his finger with her tiny hand. One evening, when Hope was 6 weeks old and sleeping peacefully in the cradle, Caleb had built Eliza stood on the porch watching the sunset. The land stretched before her in all its wild beauty, and she thought about the woman who'd stepped off the train a year and a half ago, terrified, broken, running from horrors she could barely articulate. That woman was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, someone who'd learned to trust again, to love again, to believe in her own worth. Someone who'd found home, not in a place, but in the people who'd chosen to stand with her. Caleb came out to join her, wrapping his arms around her from behind and resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "How far I've come. How different everything is from what I expected. When I answered your advertisement, I thought I was just trading one form of survival for another. I never imagined I'd find this real happiness, real love, real peace." "I never imagined it either," Caleb admitted. "After Sarah died, I thought that part of my life was over, that I'd live out my days alone going through the motions. But then you showed up with your suitcase and your fear and your incredible courage, and everything changed. You gave me my life back, Eliza. You gave me a family again. We gave each other a second chance, Eliza said. That's what this is. Both of us taking something broken and building it into something beautiful. From inside the house, Hope began to cry, a healthy, demanding sound that made them both smile. Eliza went to tend to her daughter, lifting the baby from her cradle and settling into the rocking chair by the fire. Caleb sat nearby, watching them both with an expression of such contentment that it made Eliza's throat tight with emotion. "Tell me a story," she said to him. "Tell me about the future, about what our life is going to look like." Caleb leaned back, thinking, "Well, Hope's going to grow up wild and free, learning to ride before she can properly walk. She'll have your determination and my stubbornness, which will make her a force to be reckoned with. We'll probably have more children, brothers and sisters to keep Hope company. We'll expand the ranch, build it into something even bigger than my father imagined. You'll become the unofficial mayor of the women's community out here, organizing and protecting and making sure no one else has to face what you faced alone." "That sounds perfect," Eliza said. "What else?" "We'll grow old together, watch our children grow and have children of their own. Sit on this porch 50 years from now and talk about the old days, about the time you showed up on that train platform, and I knew my life was about to change. And through all of it, through the hard times and the good times, through drought and prosperity, through everything life throws at us, we'll face it together, as partners, as equals, as two people who chose each other and kept choosing each other every single day." Eliza looked down at Hope, then up at Caleb, and felt tears of pure joy slide down her cheeks. "I choose you," she said, "today and tomorrow and every day after. I choose this life. I choose us." "And I choose you," Caleb said. "Always." Outside, the Wyoming wind whispered through the grass, carrying with it the promise of tomorrow. The ranch settled into nighttime quiet, horses in the barn, cattle in the fields, the creek murmuring over stones. And inside the small house that had become a sanctuary, a family sat together in the firelight, bound not by obligation or duty, but by choice and love and the simple, profound commitment to face whatever came together. Eliza Mercer had arrived in Wyoming running from fear, but she'd found something infinitely more powerful, a home where fear had no place, where love was measured in patience and respect, where every day was a choice to build something better. She'd found her people, her purpose, her peace. She'd found at last exactly where she belonged. And as Hope fell asleep in her arms and Caleb reached over to take her hand, Eliza spoke the words that had saved her life, the words that had become her truth, the words she would pass down to her daughter and all the children who came after. "Fear has no place in our home. Not then, not now, not ever again." Outside, the stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, indifferent and eternal. But inside that house, in the warm circle of firelight and love, 3 hearts beat in rhythm, proof that even the darkest past could be transformed into the brightest future, that even the deepest wounds could heal given time and care, and that sometimes the end of one story was simply the beginning of another, better one. The mail-order bride who'd arrived with fear in her eyes had become a woman who looked at the world with hope and courage, ready to face whatever tomorrow brought, secure in the knowledge that she was loved. She was safe, and she was finally, truly free.